The story began just a few days ago at this very building, a quiet administrative office that held the keys to a new life. Inside, a weathered land agent delivered a crushing blow, informing his visitor that the specific plot of land he had been eyeing was sold 4 days prior. He stood there in shock, staring at the 5 gold coins he had spent 3 grueling years saving. They felt heavy yet worthless now, especially as the agent dismissively noted how dirty the currency had become while questioning if there was even any other good land left. Desperation took hold as he pleaded for any alternative, insisting that he didn't need a house or comfort, just a place to call his own. The agent remained skeptical, leafing through records and noting that 5 coins rarely bought anything of value in this market. The older man paused, his eyes narrowing as a specific, perhaps questionable, opportunity crossed his mind. With a sudden thud, he unfurled a map across the desk, announcing he had a massive tract of land that cost exactly 5 coins. He warned that the territory was a wild forest hemmed in by mountains and the sea, a place where no one dared to tread and about which no information existed. Despite the risks and the extreme isolation, the young man didn't hesitate. Having nothing left to lose, he claimed the unexplored wilderness as his own. This was the turning point for a youth who had been cast out of his home at 15, a boy who had always been told he possessed no special talents or future. He set out from his rural home with little more than a pack on his back and a naive dream. The allure of the adventurer's life had been too strong to resist, driven by a simple desire to do something that seemed cool. Upon reaching the bustling city, however, the harsh truth of the profession began to sink in. While he donned basic leather armor and a sword, he felt small compared to the seasoned veterans and powerful mages who occasionally graced the streets. Realizing that the life he imagined was far from the gritty reality, he watched those elite figures with a mix of awe and envy, knowing that most who called themselves adventurers were merely scraping by. Instead of slaying monsters, he found himself performing menial labor like chopping wood and preparing food, realizing that without true combat skills, survival was a constant, grueling struggle. This cycle of drudgery continued as he took on any odd job available, from tending gardens to manual labor, only to squander his meager earnings on fleeting comforts. He was trapped in a loop of working just to survive, his savings vanishing as quickly as they were earned on temporary pleasures. Despair eventually took hold, leaving him huddled in the shadows of the city, contemplating a future that seemed increasingly bleak. With no aptitude for trade or craft, he felt the weight of his failures, seriously considering abandoning the path of an adventurer altogether as the situation threatened to worsen. In that moment of darkness, a memory of his roots flickered to life, bringing a new sense of purpose to his eyes. He reminded himself that even if he lacked the talent for heroics, he was still the son of a farmer, and the dream of owning his own land began to take root in his mind. 3 years of grueling discipline and careful saving finally bore fruit, allowing him to stand ready with 5 hard-earned coins and a pack laden with the tools of a pioneer. With a heavy axe and shovel strapped to his back, he declared his intention to start anew, leaving the city behind to claim the land he now rightfully owned. As he approached the rugged outskirts of the kingdom, a sentry from the kingdom of Estonia blocked his path, confused by his direction. The soldier warned that nothing lay ahead but military training grounds, but the young man simply pointed toward the distant, untamed horizon, firmly stating that the land beyond was now his. He is stopped by the sentry, who requests to see his adventurer card. The soldier expresses deep concern, pointing out that the land the youth intends to settle is practically unexplored territory, often referred to by locals as the dangerous demonic realm. He presents his identification, a simple, low-ranking tag that records his name and rank. The material and color of such cards are destined to change as one ascends the hierarchy, but for now, his remains a humble token of the lowest class, unchanged since it was first issued. Seeing his meager credentials, the soldiers exchange skeptical glances. One of them bluntly suggests that he should at least practice basic survival skills in a safer, nearby forest before even dreaming of entering the devil's nest. The youth can't help but feel a sting of humiliation, wondering if he is merely being toyed with. Despite their warnings, he eventually finds himself deep within the thicket of a dense, ancient forest. The air is heavy with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant, unidentifiable cries. He pauses to consult his map, finding the supposedly dangerous demonic realm to be unexpectedly tranquil. He reflects on the fact that these deeper, untamed reaches of the woods are now officially his property, though the silence feels almost deceptive. Suddenly, his internal monologue is cut short by a sharp, snapping sound nearby. He freezes, his eyes widening as he senses a presence lurking just beyond the foliage. He watches in horror as a massive, snarling bear erupts from the shadows into the clearing, accompanied by a giant, buzzing hornet. The sheer scale of the predators leaves him paralyzed with shock as they loom over his newly claimed territory. A primal scream of terror escapes him as the reality of his situation sinks in. He realizes with a jolt of pure panic that he is utterly outmatched. A wild bear and a Vespa hornet are far beyond his current ability to survive. He watches in frozen terror as the massive bear lets out a deafening roar, but the beast's fury isn't directed at him. Instead, the two predators turn on each other, the bear's heavy claws tearing through the air to strike the giant hornet in a desperate struggle for dominance. Moments later, the youth peers cautiously from behind the foliage, his heart hammering against his ribs as he surveys the aftermath. The giant insect lies broken and motionless on the forest floor, and he wonders with a shaky breath if the immediate danger has finally passed. Realizing he has been granted a rare opportunity, he decides to salvage what he can from the fallen creature. Despite his trembling hands, he draws his blade and begins the grim work of harvesting materials, feeling a surge of unexpected luck amidst the lingering fear. His efforts are soon rewarded as he pulls a shimmering, dark gem from the carcass. Along with the magic stone, he manages to secure several arthropod eyes and delicate feathers, a haul far more valuable than anything he could have hoped for. These magic stones are the very source of a monster's power, acting as a conduit that allows them to manipulate mana and unleash their deadly abilities. Each stone is unique, carrying the specific properties of the creature from which it was taken. As he inspects the hornet's remains, he notices that the venomous stinger is missing, leading him to recall the lessons from his time at the Adventurers Guild. His instructor had explained that while humans must draw magic from the world around them, monsters are born with these potent stones embedded within their very forms. A sudden thought strikes him, causing him to turn his gaze away from the insect and back toward the clearing. If the hornet possessed such a treasure, then the other beast might offer an even greater prize. His suspicions are confirmed when he finds the massive bear slumped lifelessly nearby, having succumbed to its wounds from the frantic battle. The silence of the woods is heavy as he stands before the fallen titan, realizing the true scale of the fortune and the danger he has stumbled upon. He begins the arduous task of harvesting the fallen beasts. He secures thick fur and as much meat as he can carry, though he notes with caution that the flesh has been tainted by poison. To make the most of his haul, he decides to skin the hides and dry the meat, preparing it for the long journey ahead. After finishing his work, he sets off again. The dense forest stretches out before him, a vast green sea under a clear sky. 3 days of trekking deeper into the wilderness finally bring him to his destination. A weary but triumphant smile crosses his face as he realizes he has finally arrived at the place he will call home. As he looks upward, the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the mountains pierce the clouds, standing as silent sentinels over the untamed land. He gazes out over the sprawling greenery, a sense of ownership washing over him. This wild, beautiful expanse is finally his land, the foundation for his future. Looking closer, he notices a river cutting through the terrain, serving as a natural boundary for his territory. He observes that the ecosystem on the far side of the water appears distinctly different, hinting at new challenges and wonders beyond the bank. From his vantage point, the landscape is breathtaking, with the lush valley floor giving way to the steep, rocky slopes of the distant mountains. Stepping into the cool, shallow waters of the Boundary River, he resolves to take the first definitive step into this new chapter of his life. However, just as he commits to the crossing, something startling catches his eye, causing his breath to hitch in sudden surprise. He steps cautiously into the shallow water, but his progress is immediately halted. A translucent, viscous mass surges upward, latching onto his boot with a sudden, wet splash. The creature seems to materialize from the river itself, its form shifting and bubbling as it grips his leg. Staring down at the strange entity, he tries to maintain his composure despite the sweat beading on his brow. He asks for confirmation, questioning if the creature is indeed a slime. In response, the gelatinous being lets out a high-pitched, piercing shriek, its dark, hollow eyes and gaping mouth twisting into a grotesque expression of hostility. The youth stands his ground against the gelatinous creature, his breath hitching as a wave of dizziness washes over him. He realizes his magical reserves are dangerously low and fears that another direct assault might leave him unconscious from exhaustion. To defeat the beast, he knows he must strike the glowing core at its center from a distance, avoiding any further drain on his energy. Frustration boils over as his improvised projectile, a simple farming hoe, sails wide of the mark. His eyes widen in dismay as the tool is instantly consumed, the slime's acidic body dissolving the metal and wood into nothingness before his very eyes. Refusing to give up, he lunges forward with a desperate grunt, putting all his remaining strength into a physical strike with a small blade. The impact is messy, sending sprays of translucent fluid everywhere as the creature emits a high-pitched, gurgling cry of pain. The creature finally collapses, its form melting into a steaming puddle on the forest floor. Though he is drenched in foul-smelling residue and gasping for air, a triumphant smile breaks across his face. He has survived his first real encounter, even if the taste of his slime is repulsive. After the adrenaline fades, he sifts through the remains to find a small, glowing magic stone, though he laments the loss of a bear pelt that was ruined in the fray. The meager rewards for such a life-threatening struggle leave him feeling discouraged about his prospects in this harsh land. He shakes off the disappointment, turning his gaze toward the dense tree-line as the shadows begin to lengthen. With nightfall approaching, he understands that finding a safe place to rest is now his most urgent priority, leaving no time for self-pity. Stepping deeper into the unfamiliar woods, he marvels at the strange flora surrounding him. Unlike anything he has seen before, he begins to formulate a plan, hoping to gather enough branches and large leaves to construct a basic shelter for the night. He discovers a broad, fan-like leaf and attempts to harvest it, only to find that the stem oozes a thick, viscous liquid. Despite the strange properties of the local vegetation, he continues his search for materials, determined to secure his camp before the light fails completely. He cautiously navigates the dense foliage, only to be startled when a cluster of bend grass suddenly snaps shut around him, its jagged leaves mimicking a predator's maw. After pulling away from the snapping plants, he discovers a butterbur and is surprised to see fresh water gushing from its severed stem, a vital find in the humid wilderness. Continuing his trek, the youth keeps a watchful eye on his surroundings, the dense canopy overhead filtering the fading light as he searches for a suitable place to rest. His journey leads him to an unexpected clearing where a vibrant field of flowers blooms amidst the towering trees, a sight that strikes him as strangely out of place in the heart of the jungle. Upon closer inspection, the beauty of the meadow is marred by the grim discovery of bleached animal skulls nestled among the petals, raising the chilling question of whether these were once formidable monsters. Despite the unsettling sight, he decides to prioritize his survival by setting up camp nearby, though a deep sense of unease gnaws at him, warning that something in this beautiful place is dangerously wrong. As night finally claims the forest, the youth manages to construct a modest lean-to and ignite a small fire, the crackling flames providing a meager comfort against the encroaching darkness and his growing hunger. He soon finds relief in the sizzling aroma of wild bear meat roasting over the embers, grateful for the successful hunt that will sustain him through his first night in this mysterious land. He eats heartily, the taste of the wild bear meat providing a small comfort against the growing realization that survival here will be a constant struggle. As he finishes his meal, he resolved to spend the following day organizing his findings and better understanding the dangerous flora and fauna of this unforgiving wilderness, knowing that the plants and animals of this forest are far from easy to manage. Suddenly, the silence of the night is broken by a low, guttural growl as a pair of powerful jaws, lined with razor-sharp teeth, parts slightly in the shadows. The youth freezes, his heart hammering against his ribs as two glowing orbs pierce the darkness from within the dense foliage, leaving him to wonder what kind of beast could possess eyes of such terrifying size. From the undergrowth emerges a green tiger, a massive predator whose striped coat and predatory gaze command the very air around it. Seeing the beast, he is instantly transported back to the guild instructor's grim warning. To encounter such a creature while unarmed is a death sentence. The memory of her voice, advising him to prepare to forfeit his life in such a situation, chills him more than the night air as he realizes the gravity of his predicament. Desperate, he reaches into his pack and hurls a piece of meat toward the predator, hoping a simple distraction will buy him a moment of safety. He shouts a command for the beast to take the bait, revealing that the meat has been laced with poison in a desperate bid for survival. The tiger, however, merely watches the offering fall to the ground with an expression of detached curiosity, completely unmoved by the youth's frantic attempt at trickery. The predator's golden eyes remain fixed on him, ignoring the tainted meat entirely as it lets out a low, menacing growl. A cold dread washes over the youth as he understands the creature's true intent. It has no interest in scavenged scraps when fresh, living prey stands right before it, and his plan has failed completely. It lunges forward with terrifying speed, its massive paws churning the earth as it closes the distance. The youth can only watch in horror, crying out as the predator's shadow looms over him. As it lunges, the youth scrambles to his feet and bolts into the dense undergrowth, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every branch that scrapes his skin feels like a claw as he desperately weaves through the thick foliage, trying to put any obstacle between himself and the beast. He continues his frantic flight, but the creature is relentless, its hot breath almost touching the back of his neck. A primal scream of pure terror escapes him as the tiger unleashes a deafening roar, its jaws snapping inches from his heels. Behind him, the predator prepares for the final strike, its sharp claws unsheathed and its fangs bared in a lethal snarl. It seems there is no escape from the inevitable end, as the beast prepares to pounce. As it leaps, the beast's momentum suddenly betrays it as it hits a slick patch of ground, its massive body tumbling forward. It loses its footing entirely, rolling onto its back in a chaotic blur of fur and stripes, exactly where the youth had intended. Watching it tumble, the young man stops and glances back, a surge of relief washing over him as he realizes his desperate gamble worked. A triumphant smile breaks through his fear, and he whispers to himself that the trap was perfectly placed, catching the beast exactly as he had hoped. Leaving him behind, the beast recovers and lets out a final, frustrated roar that echoes through the dark woods, but its prey is already gone. The youth disappears into the shadows of the forest, leaving the confused predator to snarl at the empty air. Far from its reach, the youth finally collapses against the trunk of a large tree, his body trembling from the adrenaline. He buries his face in his hands, haunted by the realization that he nearly died on his very first day. The weight of his new life feels crushing, and he wonders if he has any hope of surviving the days to come. He remains hunched over, his hands clutching his head as the weight of his situation crushes his spirit. Suddenly, the rustling of the undergrowth snaps him back to reality. The sounds are growing louder, and he realizes with a jolt of terror that something is closing in on him. Driven by pure instinct, he scrambles to his feet, convinced that this is a fight he cannot win. He resolves to abandon this dangerous place and flee back to the village, hoping to quietly start his life over. His boots crunch against the forest floor as he begins his retreat. Yet, even as he moves, a paralyzing doubt takes hold. He wonders what starting over would even look like, or if he is even capable of a different life. Haunted by his past, he recalls the bitter memories of the town, where seasoned adventurers looked down on him with dismissive glares. He can still hear the stinging words of those who called him a useless amateur, reminding him that he was never truly welcome or needed in their ranks. He grits his teeth, the salt of his sweat stinging his eyes as the harsh reality of his past failures settles in. Tears stream down his face as he finally admits to himself that running away won't change anything. With no other options left, he realizes he must find the strength to stay and face whatever comes next. He sat alone, the weight of his decision pressing down on him as he stared into the distance, acknowledging that this harsh wasteland was now his only home and his only future. Having climbed to the safety of a sturdy branch, he called out to the predator below, his voice steady despite the danger as he lured the beast toward his position. The massive tiger responded with a low, guttural growl before letting out a deafening roar that shook the very leaves of the forest. On the forest floor, a glistening piece of bait lay waiting, its scent designed to draw the creature into the trap. It sniffed the offering cautiously, its predatory instincts warring with its hunger before a sudden realization caused its pupils to contract in sharp alertness. Bathed in the ethereal glow of the full moon, the beast stood amidst a flurry of falling petals, a silent and deadly sentinel in the heart of the woods. Watching from above, the youth felt a cold sweat break across his brow as he monitored the beast's every movement. He realized with grim clarity that his entire plan rested on a single prediction. If he had miscalculated the creature's behavior, his life would end right there in the jaws of the approaching monster. The predator launched itself upward with an explosive burst of power, its claws shredding the bark as it scaled the trunk toward its cornered prey. It lunges with a ferocious roar, but its momentum carries it straight into a dense patch of white blossoms. Almost instantly, the predator's limbs go limp, and it collapses into a deep, unnatural slumber as the youth watches in disbelief. He realizes with a surge of relief that his gamble paid off. The flower garden wasn't just scenery, but a lethal natural trap that has successfully neutralized the beast. These mysterious white petals possess a potent, sleep-inducing fragrance, capable of bringing even the most dangerous monsters to their knees in seconds. Taking no chances, he covers his face with a cloth to avoid inhaling the toxic pollen as he cautiously approaches the incapacitated tiger to finish the job. The struggle is finally over, and he stands victorious, having harvested the creature's meat and a rare magic stone of unknown properties from its remains. As night falls over the dense forest, a thin trail of smoke rises from a small campfire, marking his temporary refuge in the wilderness. He attempts to satisfy his gnawing hunger with the tiger's meat, but the first bite is so foul and bitter that he nearly chokes, realizing the prize is practically inedible. He laments his situation, recalling that he was in the middle of a meal before the chaos began, and now the hunger is becoming unbearable. Exhausted and still starving, he collapses onto the grass, his mind drifting toward dreams of a decent, delicious meal as his strength begins to fail him. He lets out a weak sigh, the reality of his isolation in the wilderness finally sinking in. He stares up with weary eyes, the weight of his struggle etched into his features. Though the wilderness has proven far more unforgiving than he anticipated, a flicker of resolve remains. He silently vows to endure the hardship and give his all for just a while longer, refusing to let the forest break him yet. As night falls, he sits alone by a crackling campfire, the smoke drifting toward a bright, indifferent moon. Beside his meager shelter, the silence of the woods presses in on him. In the flickering light, the grim reality of his situation settles in. To him, this beautiful, deadly landscape is nothing less than a personal hell. He finds himself in a strange, concrete canyon, surrounded by towering structures and glowing signs. Confusion washes over him as he wonders where he is and what is happening in this alien landscape. Looking around, he sees a sea of people, all dressed in unfamiliar, colorful garments, moving with a purpose he cannot fathom. The sheer number of individuals in one place is overwhelming. The vision shifts to a dim room, where a glowing rectangular surface casts a cold light on a silhouette. He reaches out, his mind reeling as he tries to understand the nature of this bizarre, artificial world. Suddenly, the dream shatters with a sharp cry, and he bolts upright, gasping for air. His eyes are wide with terror, the remnants of the strange vision still clinging to his mind as he finds himself back in the familiar, rugged wilderness. Standing amidst the trees, he gazes toward the distant, snow-capped peaks, the morning light doing little to ease his confusion. He mutters to himself, questioning the recurring nature of that vivid, impossible dream. With a long, weary yawn, he stretches his arms, trying to shake off the lingering unease. He reflects on how this particular vision has haunted him since he was a child, leaving him to wonder if such a place truly exists somewhere beyond the horizon. His moment of reflection is cut short when he spots a translucent, gelatinous creature oozing over his belongings. Panic sets in as he realizes a slime has found its way onto his bag, threatening his meager supplies. Reacting quickly, he grabs a heavy tool and swings at the creature, cursing his luck. The impact splashes the core of the beast as he desperately tries to drive the scavenger away from his gear. He exhales a sigh of relief, checking the contents of his pack after the brief skirmish. The slime lies defeated, and he marvels at how easily he dispatched it, wondering if his strength is truly growing. After securing his gear, he adjusts the straps of his heavy backpack. With a determined look, he prepares to push further into the unforgiving wilderness he now calls home. As he treks through the dense foliage, he reminds himself of the importance of surveying his new territory. Suddenly, he freezes, his eyes widening an unexpected sight ahead. His gaze falls upon a figure slumped against the base of a massive tree, a lamia. Her human torso is still, and her long, scaled tail is coiled limply on the forest floor. Approaching the silent figure, he confirms his suspicion that the creature is indeed a lamia, a being known for its formidable power. However, she shows no signs of life, her eyes closed and her body motionless. Upon closer inspection of her open mouth, he discovers a familiar object, a poisoned stinger from a Vespa hornet. He realizes with a start that this was the very bait he had used against a predator the day before, and he moves to claim the creature's magic stone as a resource. Leaving the remains behind, he looks toward the thickest part of the woods. The path ahead is overgrown, but he resolves to venture deeper into the area known for its swayman grass. His progress is soon halted by the sight of massive, glowing mushrooms sprouting from a fallen log. Though hunger gnaws at him, he quickly suppresses the urge to taste them, knowing that in this lethal environment, caution is the only way to survive. He reaches out and firmly grasps a small, green-furred rodent that had been scurrying through the undergrowth. Holding the creature aloft, he decides to call it a forest rat, noting its unique coloration as he prepares for his next move. With a swift motion, he tosses the small animal toward a cluster of oversized, spotted mushrooms, which immediately erupt in a thick cloud of spores. The rodent is instantly overcome by the discharge, falling limp and motionless as the spores take effect, confirming his suspicions about the flora's lethality. He observes the scene, concluding that the forest is filled with such natural hazards, specifically paralyzing spores that leave no room for error. Suddenly, a realization strikes him, his eyes widening as he connects the dots between the environment and his own survival strategy. Looking at the crude tools at his disposal, he acknowledges that setting traps is the only viable method for someone without formal combat training to face the monsters of this world. He carefully places the swayman flowers and mushrooms into the pit, completing his trap. Exhaustion finally takes hold, and he collapses onto the dirt, breathing a sigh of relief that the grueling work of digging is finally over. He stares up at the canopy, feeling the gnawing ache of hunger in his stomach. The physical toll of the day is too much. He declares to the empty forest that he won't take another step, his body demanding rest. As darkness settles over the dense woods, he drifts towards sleep with a single hope, that his efforts will be rewarded with a significant catch when the sun rises. The silence of the night is broken by the morning chorus of birds as light begins to filter through the trees once more. He rouses himself, his eyes wide with anticipation. Rubbing the back of his neck, he sets off to see what his trap has claimed during the night. The youth stands frozen, dwarfed by the sheer mass of the sleeping wild boar before him. Its rhythmic breathing is like a low thunder, and he can't help but gasp at the sheer scale of the creature. Despite his trepidation, he inches closer, axe in hand. He mutters to himself, shaking his head at the absurdity of the task. Even in its slumber, the beast seems far too large for a single man to handle. With a decisive strike, he ends the creature's life, the heavy thud of the axe followed by a spray of dark blood. He wipes his brow, exhaling a long breath of relief and exhaustion, realizing that the monumental task of butchering such a carcass will consume his entire day. As he begins the messy work, a sudden movement within the beast's gullet makes him recoil in surprise. To his bewilderment, a blue snake slithers out from the boar's stomach, leaving him to wonder about the strange and predatory nature of this forest ecosystem. By the time the last of the materials are gathered, fangs, fur, meat, and a glowing magic stone, the sun has long since dipped below the horizon. He collapses against the remains of his prize, the weight of the day's labor pressing down on him as darkness envelopes the clearing. Hunger eventually overcomes his fatigue, and soon the smell of roasting meat fills the night air. He takes a large, savory bite, a look of pure bliss crossing his face as he savors the first proper meal he's had in far too long. After finishing his meal, he inspects his tools, finding the blades of both his axe and knife completely blunted by the thick hide and bone. His gaze shifts to the sturdy remains of the boar, considering if the creature's own bones might serve as a more durable substitute for his ruined equipment. The young man begins to experiment, testing the weight and sharpness of the skeletal fragments. With focused determination, he starts to fashion a new tool, hoping to turn the remnants of his hunt into the means for his continued survival. He examines the curved bone in his hand, testing its balance, and wondering if the material will suffice for his needs. Moving to the next step, he carefully pours viscous tree sap into a clay mold, confident that it will harden into a stone-like substance. He then tests the heft of a newly fashioned axe handle, finding it heavy but manageable. With a final adjustment, the axe is complete, and he holds it aloft with a sense of triumph. Beside the axe lies a sharp, bone handle blade, both tools now ready for use in the harsh wilderness. As he wipes the sweat from his forehead, the first rays of dawn break through the canopy, making him realize he has worked through the entire night without feeling a hint of exhaustion. Driven by this newfound energy, he returns to the earth, digging a deep pit to set another trap for the forest's inhabitants. He finishes the task with surprising speed, standing back to admire the completed trap while questioning how he managed to work so much faster than the day before. Looking down at his own hand, he ponders the source of this sudden vitality, wondering if the meat of the great beast he consumed has granted him strength, or if he is simply adapting to this brutal life. He marvels at his newfound power, a stark contrast to his past where every effort to grow stronger seemed to lead nowhere. Looking at his hand, he reflects on how his body has changed overnight, feeling a level of physical capability that was previously unattainable. The following morning, the sun rises over the distant, snow-capped peaks, signaling the start of a new day of exploration. Venturing out once more, he navigates the rugged terrain of the forest, his new equipment secured and ready for use as he continues his search. His path leads him to a dark, yawning opening in the rock face, a cave tucked away amidst the dense foliage. Stepping inside, he is startled to find a torch mounted to the wall, prompting him to wonder if the cavern is currently inhabited. He offers a polite greeting to the shadows as he prepares to light his own brand. The interior reveals a surprisingly structured space, with a stone table and alcoves carved directly into the earth, resembling a primitive but functional home. Though the air feels still and the place appears deserted, he notes the unmistakable signs of past habitation, wondering who could have lived in such isolation. Driven by curiosity, he pushes further into the dark, winding tunnels, his torch casting long, flickering shadows against the cold stone walls as he explores the depths. He peers cautiously over the edge of a stone wall, his eyes wide with anticipation and dread as he looks into the hidden chamber. Inside the chamber, a grim sight awaits. A skeleton, draped in tattered robes, sits motionless upon a high-backed chair, its bony fingers still clutching a leather-bound volume. Its hollow sockets seem to stare back at him, and he freezes, his breath hitching as he processes the presence of the long-dead inhabitant. Resting in its lap is the book, its worn cover embossed with the initials P.J. in a formal, archaic script. He approaches with a grunt of effort, carefully prying the volume from the skeletal grip, his movements tense and deliberate. Once the book is in his hands, he realizes it is a personal diary. It is filled with meticulous records of the local fauna, identifying various monsters, edible flora, and medicinal herbs that could prove invaluable for his survival. As he flips through the pages, he recognizes the immense value of the information, realizing it contains vital knowledge for surviving in these parts. His thumb stops on a page covered in intricate diagrams and dense, cryptic script, prompting him to wonder what this mysterious entry could possibly mean. He continues to flip through the pages, his brow furrowing as he notes the lack of specific details about the ruins in the demonic realm. The text mentions a guardian locked in an eternal struggle, but the entries are frustratingly vague about the nature of the conflict. Deepening his study, he discovers that the ancient magic circles protecting this place far surpass modern understanding, rendering brute force and standard magic useless. The diary warns that mastery of space-time magic is the only way forward and mentions a colossal beast that emerges every 3 months to terrorize the area. Because of these revelations, he concludes that the previous inhabitant, PJ, was conducting deep research into the mysteries of this land, though the most complex diagrams still defy his comprehension. The weight of this discovery settles over him, and he looks away from the parchment with a newfound sense of respect for the fallen scholar. Moments later, he hammers a simple wooden cross into the earth to mark a final resting place. Standing before the humble monument, he offers a quiet wish for the stranger to find the peace that eluded him in life. As his gaze shifts to the nearby warehouse, he observes the array of specialized gear, knives and armor forged for metals he doesn't recognize, which confirms that PJ was no mere hermit, but a master craftsman and a veteran adventurer. This realization only deepens the mystery, leaving him to wonder how a man possessed of such formidable skill and knowledge could have ultimately perished in this place. He stood at the entrance, a plume of breath escaping into the cool air as he contemplated the mysteries of the man who came before him. While the fate of PJ remained a puzzle, he chose to focus on the fortune of finding such a sanctuary, accepting that some secrets were meant to stay buried. The interior of the cavern stretched out before him, appearing remarkably untouched and offering a sense of security that was hard to find in the wild. It seemed like a relatively safe place to establish a foothold. He wasted no time, sprinting back and forth through the woods to gather his belongings and haul them into his new domain. With every trip, his resolve to move here solidified, the physical exertion fueling his excitement. His mind raced with possibilities as he looked over the site, envisioning how this simple cave could be transformed into a beautiful home. The dreams he held for this place were expanding, seeing it not just as a shelter, but as a true base of operations. He set to work immediately, his silhouette moving purposefully through the dark tunnels as he began to tidy the messy rooms. The sound of rhythmic hammering echoed through the stone as he repaired what was salvageable and crafted new necessities from the materials at hand. He eventually paused to admire his handiwork, standing in a room now illuminated by torches and furnished with a sturdy wooden table. Surveying the clean space and the warmth of the hearth, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, concluding that the results were finally good enough. He returned from one last trip outside and announced his arrival to the empty air, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. Though he knew there was no one there to welcome him back, the words, "I'm home," felt right in this new sanctuary. He finally settled into a chair, a book in one hand and a simple meal in the other, enjoying the quietude of his surroundings. Reflecting on his new life, he realized that being free from the complications of human relationships suited his nature perfectly. The two sentries gasped for air, their spears held low as fatigue sets in. One of them curses their luck, wondering why a wild bear would be prowling in such a place, while his companion urges him to seize the moment and end the beast's life. Before they can act, the massive predator rears up, its roar echoing through the dense forest. The soldiers freeze, dwarfed by the sheer size and ferocity of the creature. Their captain grits his teeth, sweat pouring down his face as he realizes the stakes. If they fail to stop the beast here, it will surely reach the main road and endanger travelers. His subordinate, however, is paralyzed by fear, stammering that the task is simply impossible. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the tension as a hooded figure steps into the clearing, startling the weary guards. He moves with a calm confidence that stands in stark contrast to the soldiers' desperation. He approaches them casually, offering his assistance after observing that they appear to be in significant trouble. The soldiers look on in disbelief as the stranger stands between them and the looming threat. They question his identity, wondering if a mere civilian could possibly survive such an encounter. Ignoring their skepticism, the man looks toward the bear and asks an unseen companion if they should intervene, noting that even the strong struggle against such beasts in these cursed lands. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunges forward, narrowly dodging a powerful swipe from the bear's claws. His movements are fluid and precise, a testament to his skill as a warrior. He then leaps high into the air, his eyes fixed on his target. He knows better than to strike the creature's thick skull, instead aiming his blade for the softer, more vulnerable parts of its body to ensure a swift kill. He delivers a final, decisive strike, his blade carving through the massive bear's neck with practiced ease. Blood sprays as the beast's roar is cut short, the sheer power of the blow leaving no room for survival. The two soldiers stand frozen, their eyes wide and mouths agape, in utter disbelief at the display of martial prowess they just witnessed. The speed and efficiency of the kill have left them completely stunned. Turning toward the bewildered men with a calm demeanor, he offers a simple greeting. He inquires if they have come from the nearby training facility, his voice steady despite the recent violence. In response to their confusion, the soldier asks for his identity, but the swordsman remains focused on his needs. He proposes a trade, offering monster meat or magic stones in exchange for seeds like wheat or vegetables. The soldier, still processing the situation, confirms that such supplies can be found back at the facility. As the conversation shifts, his thoughts drift toward other necessities. He mentions a desire to also acquire charcoal and paper, looking up at the vast, cloud-strewn sky as if planning his next steps. These items are essential for his ongoing efforts as he prepares to document his journey. A collection of supplies, including a scroll and writing tools, sits ready for use. Walking away from the encounter, he reflects on his life in this unforgiving, cursed territory. While he has grown accustomed to the dangers, he acknowledges that many regions remain unexplored and that creating detailed maps is a priority. He also notes, with a touch of amusement, how genuinely shocked the soldier seemed by his abilities. He pauses to contemplate his own growth, wondering at what point he became so formidable. He concludes that the constant struggle for survival in a land teeming with powerful enemies has forced him to evolve far beyond his original limits. He walked along a forest path, a sudden realization striking him. His focus on the hunt had been so absolute that basic hygiene had fallen by the wayside. A wave of self-consciousness washed over him as he hoped his scent wasn't too overpowering after so long without a proper wash. Seeking to remedy the situation, the swordsman found a quiet spot by the water to bathe. The cool liquid was a welcome relief, washing away the grime of his recent travels and leaving him feeling revitalized and refreshed. With his body cleansed, his thoughts turned toward more domestic pursuits. Standing before a small, fenced-off plot of land with a hoe in hand, he considered the vegetable seeds he had acquired. It seemed like the perfect time to transition from a life of constant wandering to one of more stable farming. He set to work with vigor, the rhythmic strike of the hoe against the earth marking his progress. There was much to be done to prepare the soil, but just as he was settling into the task, a sudden, heavy vibration shook the ground beneath his feet, catching him completely off guard. Looking up, the man froze in disbelief as a creature of impossible proportions emerged from the tree. It was a turtle, but one so massive it dwarfed the surrounding forest, its ancient shell rising like a mountain against the sky. Panic flared within him as the behemoth began lumbering directly toward his newly established farm. He shouted and gestured wildly, desperate to divert the creature's path before it could trample his hard work into the dirt, but the giant seemed oblivious to his frantic warnings. The confrontation ended abruptly when the massive creature shifted its weight, sending a violent spray of mud and water into the air. The force of the impact was enough to send the swordsman tumbling backward, helpless against the sheer scale of the beast's movements. He sat there, drenched and caked in filth, staring up at the indifferent giant. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. He had only just finished cleaning himself, and now, thanks to this unexpected visitor, he was once again covered in the very grime he had sought to escape. He is livid, brandishing his hoe and shouting threats at the massive creature that just ruined his hard work. The turtle, however, seems completely unaware of his existence, its ancient eyes looking elsewhere as it continues its slow trek. His bravado is short-lived as he slips on the slick, muddy ground, tumbling face-first into the swamp. The giant beast continues to lumber past, its massive limbs churning the earth without a second thought for the small man at its feet. He picks himself up, dripping with mud and frustration, reflecting on the indignity of being caught in the swamp and falling so easily. Looking up at the sheer scale of the creature, a chilling realization sets in. In a land of such behemoths, he isn't a hunter or a farmer. He's just a small piece of meat waiting to be consumed. Sometime later, the frustration has vanished, replaced by the pure bliss of a full stomach. He savors the rich flavor of his meal, his face flushed with satisfaction. He discovers a passage in the notebook left by PJ that identifies the creature as a haze turtle. The notes explain that while the meat is delicious, the soup made from it is truly irresistible, and the creatures can even be tamed as pets. As he continues reading, the text goes on to provide a sobering perspective on the dangers of this territory, noting that the haze turtle is actually considered a very weak creature within the hierarchy of the Cursed Land. Undeterred and now fully prepared for a long journey, he adjusts his heavy pack and sets a new goal. With a look of grim determination, he declares that his next destination for exploration will be the sea, ready to face whatever other weak giants might lie ahead. He sits by his camp, reflecting on his supplies. While he has plenty of meat from his recent hunt, he realizes he's nearly out of salt, regretting not asking the soldiers for some earlier. Continuing his journey, he meticulously maps the terrain. He reasons that by finding a river from a high vantage point and following it downstream, he will eventually reach the ocean. His plan proves successful as he crests a final ridge and the vast, shimmering expanse of the sea finally comes into view. While updating his map and contemplating how to extract salt from the seawater, his gaze is drawn to something unusual lying further down the shoreline. Approaching the water's edge, he is stunned to find what appears to be a human body washed up on the sand. As he gets closer, he sees a young woman lying motionless in the surf, her long hair fanned out around her and small horns protruding from her head. He stares in disbelief, his eyes wide as he processes the sight of this mysterious, unconscious stranger in such a desolate place. The young man kneels beside the unconscious girl on the sandy shore, his face etched with worry. He realizes her condition is critical, yet he lacks any medical supplies to aid her. An internal conflict brews within him as he questions the wisdom of getting involved in such a precarious situation. He stands up, his frustration mounting as he surveys his surroundings. The presence of trespassers and the threat of demons in what he considers his territory weigh heavily on his mind, adding to his growing sense of unease. Despite his concern, he attempts to distance himself from the situation, returning to his task of boiling seawater for salt. He tries to convince himself to ignore the girl's plight, but the beads of sweat on his brow and his troubled expression betray his inner turmoil. His attempt at indifference is short-lived as he finds himself fleeing for his life from a colossal, prehistoric predator. As the massive beast snaps its jaws behind him, he cries out in desperation, questioning the choices that led him to this terrifying moment. Having narrowly escaped, he focuses his efforts on preparing a crude remedy from gathered foliage. He carefully mashes the leaves in a bowl, determined to find a way to sustain the girl despite the dangers he just faced. He returns to the shore and begins to feed the mixture to the unconscious stranger. Though he acknowledges that the forest rat's food tastes foul, he knows it is essential for restoring her waning energy. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, he stands over the resting girl, having done everything in his power to stabilize her. He looks out at the darkening landscape, realizing that with night approaching, their next priority must be finding a proper meal. He eventually manages to secure a substantial catch, roasting a large giza crab over an open fire. As he savors the succulent meat and the rich miso, a moment of hard-earned relief washes over him amidst the challenges of the day. He winces as he struggles with the tough shell of the crab, a sharp pinch catching him off guard. Behind him, the mysterious girl stands silently, her expression unreadable as she watches him work. He feels her gaze intensify, her wide eyes reflecting a sudden, keen interest in the meal he is preparing. He holds out a piece of the cooked meat, offering it to her. She hesitates for a moment, staring at the offering before tentatively reaching out to take it. He watches as she takes a bite, her face immediately lighting up with pure joy as the flavor exceeds her expectations. She continues to eat while he takes the opportunity to set some boundaries, explaining that while he is helping her now, this cursed land, which he calls Makio, is his territory, and she must leave once she has recovered. She tilts her head, repeating the word Makio as if she believes it to be his name. He attempts to correct the misunderstanding, but seeing her confusion, he sighs and decides it isn't worth the effort to explain the distinction. She beams at him when he shifts the conversation to ask for her own name, pointing to herself and proudly announcing that her name is Cher. She looks around expectantly for more after finishing the last morsel, but he has to break the news that the food is gone. Despite the lack of more supplies, a strange bond seems to have formed between the settler and the girl he now knows as Cher. She stares blankly, her expression unreadable as she utters a single, cryptic word. None. Seeing her struggle with words, the young man begins to sketch in the sand with a stick, hoping to bridge the communication gap and understand how she arrived in this desolate place. As he looks up from his drawings, his eyes widen in disbelief at the sheer scale of the world she seems to be describing, or perhaps the distance she has traveled. He pieces together the fragments of her story, deducing that a violent conflict erupted among her kind, the demons, and that she was forced to flee for her life. Later, as the sun begins to dip, he focuses on the mundane task of boiling seawater to extract salt, though he can't help but notice her watching his every move with an air of quiet bewilderment. Suddenly, she extends her hand, and the air itself seems to fracture as she summons a massive, swirling sphere of dark energy, her eyes glowing with an ancient power. The youth recoils in sheer terror and awe, realizing for the first time the true, overwhelming magnitude of the magic she possesses. Instead of destruction, however, she directs that immense power toward the small cooking fire, causing it to erupt into a towering inferno that leaves him scrambling back in a panic, wondering if she intends to help or simply incinerate their meager camp. She sits quietly by the embers, her silhouette framed against the dark expanse of the beach. Nearby, the young man lies under his blanket, unable to find sleep as he ponders the bizarre turn his life has taken. Under the cold light of a crescent moon, he continues to wrestle with his thoughts. If she intends to remain here in this dangerous realm, He reasons that perhaps she could teach him the secrets of her magic as a form of payment for his hospitality. The next morning, the sun rises over the tranquil shore, but the peace is short-lived for the youth. He awakens to find her clinging tightly to him in her sleep, her previous duty of watching the fire long forgotten in favor of warmth and proximity. Gently, he rouses her from her slumber, suggesting they head back to his more permanent shelter. He realizes that having a companion, even one as mysterious as her, might make the arduous tasks of survival much easier, and she sleepily agrees to follow him. As they trek through the dense foliage, her initial excitement at the sight of a simple frog quickly fades into exhaustion. Seeing her stumble, he concludes that she lacks the stamina for long journeys and decides to let her stay at his home until he can eventually construct a vessel to return her to her own kind. They finally reach the mouth of a dark, secluded cave. Looking at the rugged entrance, he feels a pang of nostalgia, the sight mirroring the solitary life he once led. Inside, the cavern has been transformed into a modest home, complete with a sturdy wooden table and a stone hearth, offering a stark but functional refuge from the wild. They finally arrived at the hidden cave dwelling, and as the young man announced his return, the girl's eyes widened with pure wonder at the sight of the interior. She didn't hesitate to make herself comfortable, throwing her arms up and excitedly declaring it her own home as well, much to his bewildered surprise. He immediately began setting boundaries, sternly telling her to stop touching his things, including the skeletal remains he called PJ, without permission. As they moved through the cave, he pointed out his various belongings, including a small green forest rat he kept for experimental purposes and the stone fireplace where he baked his bread. The day's journey had clearly taken its toll, as she soon collapsed onto his sleeping spot and drifted into a deep slumber. He stood over her, realizing that the trek through the demon realm had exhausted her completely. As he watched her sleep, his mind raced with the potential consequences of her presence. He knew that if the authorities suspected him of harboring a demon, he would face immediate arrest. Though he had brought her here on a whim, thinking she might be useful, he now worried that she would be nothing more than a dangerous burden. She remained oblivious to his inner turmoil, snoring softly with a look of absolute peace on her face. His gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable as he weighed his options. He eventually reached a firm conclusion, deciding that he would send her back as soon as she opened her eyes. Despite the strange encounter, he valued his solitary life in the demon realm too much to risk it for a girl he barely knew. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering in the air. He knew he should wake her immediately to explain the danger of her presence, deciding that waiting until morning would only complicate matters. As he reached out to gently rouse her, the girl stirred in her sleep, her voice a faint whisper as she called out his name. Tears began to track down her cheeks as she continued to mumble incoherently about frogs and her own name, her face contorted with a deep, subconscious sorrow. Seeing her distress, he froze, a sudden wave of empathy washing over him as he looked at the vulnerable creature before him. He was struck by a realization. She was just like him, a wanderer with no home to return to, cast out and alone in a world that had no place for her. He slowly withdrew his hand, clenching it into a tight fist as he resolved to change his mind about sending her away. Instead of waking her, he carefully draped a blanket over her shoulders, choosing to offer her comfort rather than exile. And so, in the heart of the cursed land, an unlikely bond was forged, marking the beginning of a strange new life shared between a human and a demon. She gasped for breath, her eyes wide and her face flushed from the intense exertion of their journey through the dense woods. Seeing her struggle, he paused and looked back. She leaned heavily on her staff, her chest heaving as she called out his name in a ragged, exhausted whisper. He observed her with a stern but concerned expression while a large, flightless bird wandered nearby, noting that her lack of stamina was a grave liability. He warned her that without building her endurance, surviving in these treacherous demon lands would be an impossible feat. Dejected by his words, she slumped against a tree, admitting that she felt like a burden who couldn't even manage a simple exploration. He remained silent for a moment, contemplating their situation as he looked down at her. Suddenly, he turned to her with a look of determination, announcing his intention to train her. The offer caught her completely off guard, her eyes widening in surprise at the sudden shift in his demeanor. He immediately put his plan into action, gesturing toward the gnarled roots of a nearby tree where several small creatures scurried. He instructed her to begin her training by catching as many of the forest rats as she possibly could. Following his command, she threw herself into the task with newfound resolve, lunging through the underbrush and scrambling over the uneven terrain in pursuit of the nimble rodents. After a series of clumsy attempts, she finally emerged with a small prize held aloft, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and pride as tears of joy welled in her eyes. She is ready for the next phase of her instruction as the young man ponders their progress. He announces that the time has come for combat training, shifting their focus from simple stamina to actual defense. In response, she unleashes a massive, uncontrolled burst of fire that erupts into a towering inferno. The sheer scale of the blast is far beyond what is necessary, leaving her standing amidst the smoke, looking slightly dazed by her own power. He immediately begins to critique her technique, shouting over the fading crackle of the flames. He questions why she closes her eyes when she shoots and urges her to aim carefully, explaining that a compact, precise strike is far more effective than wasting energy on a massive, aimless fireball. As they speak, a hulking, long-nosed beast emerges from the brush, its presence a sudden and lethal threat. He urges her to strike immediately, warning that any lapse in focus or carelessness will result in her death. She tries to focus, her face scrunched in concentration, yet her eyes remain tightly shut as she prepares her magic. He watches in exasperation, demanding to know where she thinks she is aiming as a stray blast strikes the ground near the creature, sending up a plume of dirt and debris. The chaos intensifies as more explosions rock the clearing, yet the beast remains largely unscathed. She stumbles back, her movements frantic and uncoordinated as she struggles to control the volatile energy she is channeling. Finally, a lucky shot connects, and the creature lets out a pained roar as the magic finds its mark. He acknowledges the hit with a note of surprise, while she looks on, her eyes wide with the realization that she has finally succeeded. Despite the messy execution, she beams with a sense of immense accomplishment, her face radiating pride. He, however, can only watch with a look of mild irritation, wondering how she can be so satisfied with such a clumsy victory. She watches as the sun dips below the horizon, the forest canopy bathed in the orange glow of twilight, while the distant cries of birds echo through the trees. She rests heavily on his back as they trudge through the undergrowth, both exhausted after a grueling day that yielded only a single emerald monkey. He feels the weight of their slow progress, his thoughts turning grim as he considers the bleakness of their future and the futility of constant vigilance. Later, as they sit by the flickering warmth of campfire, he breaks the silence by asking her to teach him the secrets of magic, hoping to find a way to improve their dire situation. She looks at him with wide, curious eyes, seemingly surprised by his sudden request, but intrigued by the possibility. Reaching out, she takes his hands in hers, their fingers interlocking as a strange sensation begins to stir between them. His eyes widen in shock as he feels an unfamiliar energy pulsing through his veins for the very first time. He gasps as the realization hits him. A powerful current is flowing from her hands into his, and from him back into her, a rhythmic exchange of raw essence that he recognizes as true magic power. She remains calm and focused, her gaze steady as the connection between them deepens. She watches him closely, her expression unreadable for a moment before a look of pure shock crosses her face. Makio, meanwhile, is overcome by a bizarre sensation, his eyes widening as he tries to process the strange energy humming through him. Suddenly, she erupts into a flurry of frantic gestures and loud exclamations, her usual composure completely shattered. He recoils in confusion, stammering as he tries to understand the cause of her sudden outburst, while she continues to pace and fret over the revelation. After the initial shock subsides, they sit together on the forest floor, where she sighs deeply, lamenting the sheer waste of his untapped potential. He stares at his own hands in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the idea of possessing high magical power with his lack of formal training. He sinks into deep thought, resting his chin on his hand as he traces back his journey. He wonders if the grueling trials and constant growth he experienced while surviving in the demon land were the hidden catalyst for this surge in his internal mana. A sudden realization strikes him, and he raises a finger as he explains that he actually possesses the ability to cast basic life magic. He admits that he's simply never paid it much mind, as such utility spells have no place in the heat of life or death combat. She remains skeptical, watching with a bored expression as he attempts to demonstrate his claim. To his own surprise, a faint, rhythmic pulsing of light begins to emanate from his fingertip, confirming that the spark of magic is indeed there. As they walk through the dense woods, she explains that the core of all magic lies in the power of visualization. He playfully tests the limits of this rule, questioning if he could conjure anything he imagines, only for her to immediately shut down his more lewd suggestions with a sharp retort. He focuses his mind, chanting the word visualization like a mantra as he channels his energy. A small, flickering flame finally erupts from his finger, and while he is pleased to see the flow of magic working, he acknowledges that its slow casting time and meager size make it useless for the battlefield. Makio sets the goal for the day, explaining that they will hunt as many monsters as possible for training before heading back to their base. He decides on a challenging route up a steep cliff, and noticing her hesitation, he briefly considers offering wind magic for flight before concluding that her mana control isn't ready, leaving her to climb on her own. She protests loudly against the difficulty, but he remains firm, telling her to be quiet and reminding her that this struggle is an essential part of her development. Suddenly, a massive moth descends from the canopy, its enormous wingspan casting a shadow over the terrified girl as she screams for help. He remains remarkably calm, identifying the beast and deciding on the spot that this is the perfect solo trial for her, ignoring her tearful pleas for assistance. She tries to stand her ground, but the creature flutters its wings, releasing a shimmering cloud of scales. He watches the encounter with a detached, analytical gaze. She is suddenly seized by a violent tremor as the paralysis takes hold, while he realizes with a casual oops that he may have also been caught in the status-inflicting cloud. The giant moth flutters its massive wings, descending through the air with a rhythmic beat. He watches the creature from a crouched position on the forest floor, letting out a resigned sigh as the beast emits a high-pitched screech. Nearby, his companion is gripped by a violent tremor, her body stiffening as the paralysis takes hold while he checks on her condition. He then presents a shimmering crystal harvested from the fallen foe, asking if she desires the magic stone left behind by the moth. Seeing her interest, he proposes crafting a staff by mounting the stone onto a sturdy branch, a suggestion that leaves her wide-eyed with wonder. The result is a primitive yet potent weapon, a wooden staff topped with a jagged crystal, imbued with the moth's own paralyzing essence. She brandishes the new tool with a joyful shout, while he observes that the creation was a resounding success. With this new power in hand, her journey takes a bold new turn, marking the start of a triumphant advance through the wilderness. She lunges forward with a cry, thrusting her new staff toward a giant wasp. A crackle of electricity erupts from the weapon, seizing the insect's body in a paralyzing grip. Seeing the opening, the young man watches in awe as she immediately follows up with a burst of flame. The combination of the staff's paralysis and her own offensive magic proves devastating, sending the charred remains of the creature tumbling to the forest floor. With the threat neutralized, they continue their journey through the dense woods. She hums a cheerful tune, clearly pleased with her new combat prowess, while he follows behind, silently impressed by how smoothly they are now operating as a team. Continuing their journey, they hunt various monsters over the next few days, including a massive, armored snail. They systematically dismantle every threat they encounter with their coordinated paralysis and magic strikes. As they navigate a rocky stream, he reflects on their rapid improvement. They have grown accustomed to the harsh environment of the demon land, moving with a speed and confidence they lacked before. However, he remains mindful that his own magic still requires a moment of focused visualization to manifest, a delay that could be dangerous in a fast-paced battle. His thoughts are interrupted when she suddenly stops and beckons him over with a playful gesture. She calls out to him, her eyes bright with the excitement of a new discovery. Joining her, he peers through the foliage to see a group of imps perched on a thick branch. While she seems ready to engage, he hesitates, noting that these creatures are far more dangerous when they hunt in a pack. He observes their movements, trying to gauge if they have been spotted yet. The imps suddenly turn, their predatory eyes locking onto the pair as they prepare to swarm. Sensing the shift in the air, he urgently warns her to retreat, realizing that the sheer number of enemies has turned the tide against them. He and his companion watch as the imps they were fleeing from suddenly drop from the trees, landing with heavy thuds on the forest floor. Because of the sudden movement, a deep, resonant rumbling begins to shake the very ground beneath their feet, echoing through the dense foliage. In response, the two adventurers freeze, their eyes widening in shock as they realize the source of the sound is far larger than a mere swarm of imps. As the chaos unfolded, his attention shifted to a massive, ancient tree that began to groan and shift, revealing a twisted, agonized face carved into its bark. The behemoth, a treant, looms over them, its massive roots and branches twisting like serpents as it prepares to defend its territory. Cher immediately launches a magical strike, the impact splintering the creature's wooden hide, but he quickly identifies the threat and shouts that they are outmatched, urging her to retreat immediately. Following his lead, they both turn and sprint through the undergrowth, narrowly dodging the treant's lashing roots as the forest itself seems to turn against them. As they flee, she grips her staff tightly, her face set in a grimace of exertion as they push themselves to escape the reach of the wooden titan. She and her companion watched in horror as the paralysis took hold, their bodies heavy and unresponsive. The ancient wooden titan loomed over them, its weathered face a mask of cold indifference as a massive, whip-like branch swept through the air with a deafening crack. He grunted in pain, struggling to push her away as he collapsed to the forest floor. Desperate to save her, he urged her to leave him behind and find safety, his voice cracking under the pressure of the monster's presence. He continued his plea, his voice strained with effort, telling her that every second counted and she needed to run as fast as her legs could carry her, even if it was just one step faster than before. They managed to scramble away, just as the massive roots tore through the earth where they had stood moments before. A sudden, blinding flash of light erupted, momentarily obscuring the terrifying pursuit as they pushed themselves to go just one step farther. The wooden titan remained rooted in the distance, its presence a dark blot against the lush greenery of the valley. Below, she looked up in shock as a heavy boot slammed into the ground nearby, the impact echoing through the clearing. He had managed to hoist her onto his back, his muscles straining as he sprinted through the dense undergrowth. The mountains loomed in the distance, a far-off goal as they fled the Guardian's wrath with desperate speed. He suddenly faltered, a look of pure bewilderment crossing his face as he realized something had changed within him, a strange sensation pulsing through his limbs. His feet moved with a newfound, unnatural speed, blurring as they struck the earth and propelled them forward far faster than humanly possible, leaving only a trail of dust in their wake. He and his companion tumble onto the rocky ground, their momentum finally spent after the frantic escape. They sprawl out, gasping for air as the dust settles around them on the safety of the high ridge. Still catching his breath, the young man looks back toward the massive wooden titan they left behind, which now stands as a distant, silent sentinel against the cliffside. Beside him, the girl is equally winded, her eyes wide with the shock of their sudden flight. Turning to her, he asks if she was the one who cast a spell to propel them to safety. She simply shakes her head in a frantic negative, her hair swaying with emotion as she denies any involvement in the strange phenomenon. This revelation leaves him stunned, wondering if the magic had somehow originated from within himself. As he ponders the impossibility, she points a finger toward him, her expression mirroring his own confusion as she suggests he might be the source. In that moment, a vivid memory surfaces, a vision of a glowing rectangular board and a key device from a world he only knows through dreams. He realizes that by instinctively visualizing that strange interface, he had somehow accessed a wellspring of power he didn't know he possessed. Before he can process this further, she reaches out, her hand glowing with a soft, restorative light. He flinches slightly as the warmth of her recovery magic washes over him, soothing his aches and clearing his mind. Feeling his strength return, he offers his thanks while dusting himself off. He is curious now, asking her how she manages to channel such healing energy so effortlessly, but she seems more focused on her own excitement. As they look out over the vast, sun-drenched horizon, she admits with a cheerful shrug that she has no idea what he's talking about. The mechanics of her power remain as much a mystery to her as his own sudden burst of speed is to him. The young man examines the small blade in his hand, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he contemplates his next move in his ongoing experiments. He attempts to channel his magic into the weapon, but the heat becomes unbearable, forcing him to recoil as the coconut resin knife proves entirely unsuitable for his needs. He laments that his dream of creating a true magic sword remains out of reach with such flimsy materials, realizing that a simple resin blade cannot withstand the intensity of his practice. Spread out before him are various trophies from his hunts, horns from hell beetles, and sharp pincers. Yet none of these demonic remnants seem to possess the right affinity for the power he seeks to wield. His mind drifts back to a previous time, a memory of a shared journey through the frozen waste that still lingers in his thoughts, reminding him of how far they have come. The reverie is broken when Cher calls out from the distance, announcing that a meal is prepared, just as he focuses his energy into a single, glowing fist. He ignores the call for a moment, centering his will on the raw power gathering in his hand. With a sudden, violent release of power, the ground shatters beneath him, carving a massive crater into the earth and sending debris flying in every direction. He stares in stunned silence at the destruction he has wrought, while she looks on from the edge of the clearing, her eyes wide with disbelief at the sheer scale of the impact. She rushes toward him, her movements frantic with excitement as she marvels at the display, questioning if this could be a form of magic entirely unknown even to her own kind. He remains baffled by the noise and the result, wondering himself about the nature of the force he just unleashed. While the horned girl watched in silence, the youth's eyes lit up with a sudden realization, wondering if he had stumbled upon a truly incredible discovery. His thoughts drifted back to the meager results of his previous attempts, looking at the dense, unappetizing lumps of dough that had come from the dark, oven-like cave. Determined to do better, he promised her he would make something proper this time, while she bluntly rejected the hard, inedible slab he had first produced, insisting it didn't even count as cooking. Moments later, a stack of fresh, soft flatbreads sat ready, steaming with a far more inviting aroma. She took a bite, and her face instantly brightened, her eyes sparkling as she declared the bread absolutely delicious, much to his relief as he encouraged her to eat her fill. As he watched her eat, he felt a sense of satisfaction, though he reminded himself that while her help with the fields and mapping was invaluable, he he would eventually need to find a way to return her to her home. With that long-term goal in mind, they ventured deep into the surrounding forest, where the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of ancient trees. He shouldered his axe and explained the next step of his plan, telling her they would gather wood together to build a ship, ensuring she could return to her people whenever she felt ready. He wiped sweat from his brow, the physical labor of felling trees with a simple axe proving to be a grueling task. As he works, his mind wanders to the possibility of more efficient tools, lamenting that without proper weapons, he cannot craft the magic swords he envisions. Suddenly, a realization strikes him, and he turns his attention toward the mysterious gear left behind by the skeleton, PJ. Reaching into the collection of artifacts, he draws a slender, ornate blade, its metal gleaming with an otherworldly luster. He reasons that by imbuing this specific weapon with wind magic, he might find a shortcut through the dense timber. With a determined grip, he prepares to test the theory. The moment he swings the enchanted blade, a violent torrent of air erupts from the steel, spiraling outward with terrifying force. The sheer pressure of the wind magic carves a massive, swirling tunnel through the thicket, uprooting trees and flattening everything in its path in a display of raw, unchecked power. He stares at the weapon in his hand, his eyes wide with disbelief as the blade continues to hum with residual energy. The magnitude of the destruction far exceeded his expectations, leaving him breathless and momentarily stunned by the potency of the artifact he had so casually activated. Beside him, the young girl can't help but laugh at the absurdity of the sight, her eyes sparkling with wonder at the massive corridor now cut through the heart of the forest. The path ahead is clear, though the scale of the work done in a single stroke is almost comical. Despite the success, a cold sweat breaks out on his face as he examines the sword more closely, realizing that its magic conductivity is dangerously high. He concludes that PJ's belongings are far too volatile for everyday use, deciding then and there that such powerful tools must be handled with extreme caution. Looking over the scattered logs, he admits that the results aren't exactly what he had hoped for in terms of precision, but at least they now have an abundance of raw material for the ship. He tries to remain optimistic, noting that having more wood than they need is a good problem to have in the long run. However, a new realization dawns on him as he inspects the freshly fallen timber. He sighs, noting that because the wood is still green and full of moisture, their progress must halt. There is nothing more they can do until the materials have had proper time to dry. He considered the possibility of practicing magic infusion into his own body, lost in thought until a familiar voice called out to him. Turning, he saw Cher approaching and immediately cautioned her to remain vigilant while hunting the dangerous creatures of the forest. As she reached his side, he looked out over the landscape, surprised by how quickly the day had passed. He realized that when one is truly focused on their training, time seems to slip away unnoticed. Seeing her mischievous grin, he couldn't help but ask if she had remembered to bring the bread he was hoping for. Her playful laughter was the only answer he needed. Soon, the two were settled by a crackling fire, the aroma of roasting food filling the air as they enjoyed a simple meal. They shared a moment of quiet contentment, reflecting on the uncomplicated nature of their current life, eating when hungry and resting when the day's work was done. However, the peaceful atmosphere was suddenly broken as he felt a strange shift in the air. His expression hardened, his senses sharpening as he detected an unsettling presence nearby. Narrowing his eyes, he noted a sudden, unnatural chill and a growing cacophony that didn't belong in the quiet woods. Something was approaching, and it was moving fast. Before he could even stand, a massive, scaly limb slammed down from above, pinning Cher to the ground. He spun around in sheer terror, his heart racing as he realized they were no longer alone. Towering over them was a monstrous winged beast, its powerful talons crushing the earth where his companion lay. He stared up at the prehistoric predator in disbelief, the suddenness of the attack leaving him momentarily paralyzed. It has taken to the skies, leaving the snowy peaks far below as Makio's face contorts in sheer panic at the sudden ascent. The realization that they are being carried by a wyvern hits him with cold dread, especially as he looks down and sees the ground receding into a blur. While he frets over their precarious situation and the impossibility of escaping at such a height, Cher appears remarkably calm, almost as if she is enjoying the view from the predator's talons. The forest is quiet, save for the distant cry of birds circling above the dense canopy. In a nearby clearing, the young man stands amidst the tall grass, contemplating his chores for the day. He wonders if he should use his magic to irrigate the fields or simply set to work with his hands. His thoughts are interrupted when the girl with the small horns approaches, calling out to him with a sense of urgency. She points a slender finger toward the distance, her eyes wide with discovery as she alerts him to the presence of others nearby. Emerging from the treeline is a seasoned band of warriors, led by a knight in gleaming plate armor. Beside him stand a grim axe wielder, a stoic mage, and several other well-equipped companions, all moving with the practiced caution of those used to danger. Seeing them, the youth and his companion quickly duck into the undergrowth to remain unseen. He watches them intently, deciding it is best to observe their intentions from the safety of the shadows before making himself known. Their observation is cut short when a massive, gelatinous slime lunges at the adventurers. The knight raises his blade, shouting for his comrades to focus their attacks on the creature's core while maintaining their magical flow. He finds himself struggling, his brow furrowed with effort, as he realizes these monsters from the demon lands are far more formidable than the ordinary slimes he has faced before. The warrior's situation becomes even more desperate as a colossal serpent strikes from the brush, its jaws agape as it joins the fray. From his hiding spot, the young man watches the chaotic struggle unfold, his eyes fixed on the dangerous new threat. He watched the struggle with a critical eye, noting the inefficiency of their chaotic tactics. Using fire magic as mere bait and relying on brute force seemed wasteful, especially since they couldn't even manage to strike the monster's cores. He couldn't help but wonder if such poor coordination was standard for adventurers. As the battle lulled, the toll on the group became evident. They were completely spent, with half the party's magical reserves entirely depleted. The warriors leaned heavily on their weapons, gasping for breath in the aftermath of the skirmish. Seeing their dire state, he sighed and decided it was time to intervene, resolving to speak to them in his capacity as the landlord of these woods. He stepped out from the foliage, startling the weary knight who spun around with a look of pure shock. Calmly, he questioned their presence in this dangerous territory. The knight, recovering his composure, proudly raised his sword and introduced his group as the White Lightning Party. He boasted that they had come specifically to seek out and destroy the powerful monsters plaguing the land, promising to clear the area of all threats. In response, he produced his own adventurer card to establish his authority, firmly reminding them that they were trespassing on private property. He explained that while their intentions might be noble, it would be a significant burden if they were to get themselves killed on his land. He didn't mince words, warning them that they were likely to die if they continued. If they were already struggling against simple slimes, venturing deeper into the forest would be suicide. This blunt assessment struck a nerve with the knight, who indignantly shouted that they were a renowned party, famous even within the city. Their heated exchange was suddenly cut short by a sharp, echoing sound from the surrounding woods, forcing everyone to turn their attention toward a new, unseen threat. They are suddenly confronted by a small, winged beast, a pseudo-dragon, that descends upon the clearing with a startled cry. As the creature takes flight and disappears into the distance, the seasoned warriors can only stare in disbelief, their voices trembling as they realize the sheer scale of the dangers lurking in this territory. Amidst the lingering shock, Cher calls out to the young man, prompting him to realize that in the heat of the confrontation, he had completely overlooked one of their number. Nearby, the female cleric lies motionless on the grass, her eyes closed in a deep, unconscious state. Seeing her condition, a sudden idea strikes him. He observes the fallen woman and the surrounding woods, concluding that leaving her here would only lead to further trouble. Deep within the dense foliage, the dark, yawning mouth of a cave stands silent, a hidden threshold in the wilderness. He decides to transport the accumulated trade goods along with the unconscious cleric to the training facility, turning to his companion to see if she is ready to depart. With their supplies finally packed and ready, he reminds the girl to keep her horns concealed to avoid drawing unwanted attention as they begin their journey. He pushed forward, magic coursing through his legs to sustain his pace as he and his companion approached the fortified gates of a trading post. The heavy pack on his back felt lighter with a magical reinforcement, and he announced their departure from the wilds with a sense of relief. Upon reaching the entrance, they were greeted by a bearded man who seemed surprised to see travelers arriving from the direction of the demon land. He questioned if the hooded girl was his traveling partner, to which the youth responded with a friendly greeting, explaining he had come to conduct trade. As they walked together, he vouched for his companion's reliability despite her unusual appearance, noting that her assistance would significantly increase the value of their transactions. The trader listened intently, acknowledging the potential for a highly profitable deal. Later, inside the safety of the post, the cleric finally regained consciousness. Sitting up as the young man made a request to the trader. He asked if the man could look after the girl who had collapsed in the demon land, a request that the trader found quite amusing as the situation grew more complex. The trader's attention soon shifted to the goods brought from the wilds, specifically a blade crafted from the fang of a green tiger. He marveled at the craftsmanship, noting how rare such a material was and expressing genuine surprise that the youth had forged it himself. Continuing their discussion, he admitted he had also experimented with creating a staff using magic stones, though he was uncertain about the finer details of its quality. The trader examined the items carefully, concluding that the sword was indeed a high-quality product. With the trade underway, he listed the supplies he needed in return, including metal swords, tools for sewing and woodworking, and several sets of women's clothing. His most ambitious request, however, was for a spellbook containing space-time magic, a rare and powerful discipline. The trader grew serious, warning him that such a book would be incredibly expensive and that the market was rife with counterfeits. He suggested that it might be safer to travel to the capital to find a legitimate copy, prompting the youth to ask if it could simply be ordered from the city instead. He absorbs the trader's advice, his expression turning thoughtful as he weighs the risks of a counterfeit spellbook. Acknowledging that a direct search is the only way to ensure quality, he firmly decides to track down the rare space-time magic himself rather than relying on a potentially fraudulent order. Having made his decision, he prepares to depart as the trader concludes their business with a final logistical note. The man promises to have the requested clothing delivered to the outpost soon, instructing the youth to return in exactly 1 week to collect the items. The next day, the young settler stood ready, his pack heavy with supplies and his heart set on a new objective. He declared his intent to begin the search for the ruins mentioned in the mysterious notebook left by PJ, determined to uncover the secrets of the demon land. Beside him, the horned girl raised a fist in enthusiastic agreement, her energy matching his own. He grinned, remarking that the treasures hidden within ancient ruins were the ultimate pursuit for any man seeking adventure. However, a sudden realization halted his momentum as he looked down at the notebook in his hands. He admitted that he lacked a comprehensive map of the demon land, noting that while the book held many secrets, the exact location of the ruins remained unwritten. He felt the weight of the journey ahead become clear as he recalled the formidable beasts they had already encountered, from the prowling green tiger to the venomous stomach snake, the massive wild boar, and the small forest rats. These dangers were but a prelude to what lay deeper within the uncharted territory. They set off into the dense woods, undeterred by the challenges ahead, their footsteps steady as they navigated the thick undergrowth. They moved with a shared purpose, the silence of the forest only broken by the rustle of leaves and their quiet determination. As they emerged from the tree line, he suddenly stopped, his eyes widening at the sight before them. The landscape had shifted dramatically, revealing a vast expanse that stretched out toward the horizon. They stood at the edge of a high vantage point, looking out over a massive, bowl-shaped depression in the earth. The scale of the terrain was breathtaking, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic forest they had just left behind. They watched as the true nature of the demon land lay revealed before them, a desolate yet majestic territory of jagged peaks and deep valleys. Somewhere within this formidable landscape, the ruins they sought were waiting to be discovered. A colossal, segmented form burst from the desert dunes, showering the air with sand as it towers over the two travelers. Stunned by the sudden eruption, the girl gasps at the sheer scale of the beast, her voice trembling as she asks what such a monster could be. He quickly consults the weathered pages of the notebook, finding an entry for a sandworm that describes it as a massive but relatively weak creature, a claim that seems impossible given the titan before them. The creature then reveals its terrifying maw, a circular abyss of razor-sharp teeth that lunges toward them, prompting a cry of disbelief from the young man. In a desperate bid to defend them, he draws his blade, the steel catching the light as he prepares to strike. He lunges forward, swinging the magic sword with all his might against the creature's thick, leathery hide. However, the blade merely bounces off with a dull metallic ring, leaving nothing but a faint mark and filling him with a sudden, cold dread. Seeing that even his enchanted weapon is useless, he shouts for them to run, grabbing his companion as they flee from the pursuing behemoth. He leaned against a tree, gasping for air as the adrenaline of their narrow escape began to fade. Sweat beaded on his forehead while he frantically questioned the identity of the mysterious PJ, wondering how someone could misjudge a monster's strength so poorly. Desperate for a solution, he decided to scour the notebook once more, searching for any hidden defense that might save them from the behemoth. Once they found a moment of relative safety, the young man remained focused on the text while his companion took the opportunity to eat and recover her strength. As he pored over the pages, his eyes widened upon stumbling across a complex magic circle etched into the parchment. He realized this represented a type of weaponry fundamentally different from anything he had ever wielded. Driven by a desperate hope, he decided to experiment, tracing the intricate pattern onto the ground and channeling his own magic through the lines to trigger the power described in the notes. The result was instantaneous and violent, a sudden burst of energy that left both of them reeling in shock. He watched in awe as a sharp, ethereal blade manifested, appearing to slice through the very fabric of space itself with terrifying ease. This discovery led to a deeper realization. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that all of PJ's weapons had these magic circles seamlessly integrated into their ornate designs, hidden as mere decorations. Deep in thought, he contemplated the incredible skill required to craft such items, left with a growing sense of awe and curiosity regarding the true identity of the master craftsman. He sat in quiet contemplation, his mind troubled by the mystery of why a man like PJ would end his days alone in the demon lands. Beside him, the horned girl watched his brooding expression, eventually breaking the silence by calling him a fool for losing himself in such deep, unsolvable thoughts. By the following morning, his resolve had hardened. He declared his intent to use the spatial blade to seek revenge in the desert, though he first suggested a trip to the river to replenish their water supply before they set out. While they were busy at the water's edge, she reached out and tapped his shoulder to get his attention, pointing toward a figure standing further along the bank. There, amidst the rushing water and sun-dappled rocks, stood a familiar woman, her presence unexpected in such a remote and dangerous location. He immediately recognized her as the cleric who had been traveling with the veteran adventurers, prompting him to ask what could have brought her all this way and if she required assistance. She introduced herself as Jennifer Volkov, explaining that she had officially left the White Lightning Party and was now asking if they would be willing to take her in. Despite her polite request, he offered a blunt and immediate refusal, leaving both the newcomer and his companion stunned by his total lack of hesitation. Undeterred, she began listing her qualifications, emphasizing her skills in healing injuries and managing party resources, while he privately questioned why she would travel so far to find them in this isolated region. She recoiled as he voiced his suspicion, questioning if she hadn't left her party by choice but had instead been cast out. The sudden accusation caught her off guard, her eyes widening in shock at his bluntness. Her face flushed a deep crimson as she stammered a defensive retort, insisting that the details of her departure were none of his concern. She held up a hand, as if to ward off further prying into her past. He remained unmoved by her outburst, calmly asserting his authority over the territory and reiterating that he could not permit a stranger to reside there without understanding the circumstances. He looked at her with a steady, uncompromising gaze, waiting for the truth. The weight of his words finally broke her composure, as she confessed through tears that her former companions had deemed her unnecessary, pleading once more for a place to stay. Her expression was one of raw vulnerability as she admitted her rejection. She further explained her plight, revealing her status as an orphan with no home to return to, yet he continued to urge her to seek refuge in a safer region rather than this dangerous frontier. He argued that it would be better for her to go back to a civilized area than to risk her life in this demon-infested land. Despite his warnings, she adamantly refused to leave, declaring with newfound resolve that this specific land was the sanctuary she had been searching for all along. Her defiance left him momentarily speechless as she stood her ground. She drifted into a hopeful reverie, imagining a peaceful life free from betrayal, while he stood by in disbelief, loudly reminding her that he was still present and the land belonged to him. Her eyes sparkled with the dream of an ideal world, completely ignoring his protests. Ignoring his protests entirely, she simply asked to be shown to a house, leaving him to wonder if she had even heard a word he said. The conversation ended with her taking charge of the situation, much to his exasperation. The young settler lays down the law, his expression serious as he explains that staying here requires paying rent. He adds a stern warning. She must not make a scene about anything she witnesses in these demon lands. She nods in agreement, a soft smile touching her lips as she confirms her understanding. She assures him that she has already managed to secure the necessary funds for her stay. As she begins to settle in, her initial cheerfulness is quickly tested by the strange reality of the forest. While humming a tune, she is warned to be cautious of the local monsters, a warning that proves timely when she encounters a gelatinous slime. The creature's presence sends her into a state of visible distress, much to the exasperation of those around her. Later, the youth sits in quiet contemplation, weighing the risks of his decision. He reasons that it would be far more troublesome if she were to perish and transform into a monster, so he resolves to let her stay temporarily before eventually sending her on her way. His peace is shattered when she suddenly erupts in a panic, her finger trembling as she points toward a perceived threat. Her voice rises to a frantic shout as she alerts him to the presence of a demon in their midst. He responds with a weary sigh, his gaze fixed on her as he reminds her of the promise she just made. Beside them, the horned girl stands quietly, offering a simple loaf of bread, seemingly oblivious to the chaos her presence has caused. Choosing to distance himself from the mounting hysteria, he announces his departure to tend to the fields. She is left stammering in his wake, her confusion and alarm still very much at the surface as he walks away. She continues to protest, her face flushed with a mix of anger and concern as she questions the safety of the situation. He remains firm, describing the horned girl as a good person who deserves respect, even as the cleric points out that the girl is technically an enemy who would be arrested by the guards if discovered. She stands silent as Makio questions the morality of her church's ancient grudges. He points out that the war ended a century ago and asks if their teachings truly support persecuting the innocent. The cleric is left speechless, her face flushing as she struggles to find a counter-argument to his blunt logic. Seeing her hesitation, he shifts the topic to his own arrangement, explaining that Cher pays her way by teaching him magic. He demonstrates his progress, conjuring a small, swirling vortex of water between his hands to show how proficient he has become. He then reminds her of the harsh reality. Without a way to pay rent, she cannot stay. In a sudden burst of confidence, she declares she has 10 gold coins and asks if that would be enough to secure a month's lodging. The young man is momentarily stunned by the significant sum, his eyes widening at the mention of such wealth. However, instead of the expected clink of metal, she presents him with a slip of paper. He stares at it in confusion, realizing it is a check rather than physical currency, though she brightly assures him of its value. He lets out a heavy sigh, explaining that such a thing is useless in the wilderness. She scoffs at his reaction, lamenting the lack of sophistication in the countryside and insisting that such transactions are standard in the capital. He counters by reminding her that they are far from the capital's comforts, and no money changers venture into these dangerous lands. Despite his warning, she remains stubborn, insisting that the paper can easily be exchanged for gold. She finally relents, her pride wounded as she agrees to perform menial tasks like washing dishes or gathering firewood just to settle her debt. Her face scrunches into a petulant pout, clearly unhappy with the sudden shift from high-ranking cleric to common laborer. This frustration quickly curdles into a dark, obsessive determination as she clutches her head, her eyes wide and swirling with a manic intensity. She whispers a vow to herself, promising to conquer this wretched land and eventually exact a cold revenge on those who cast her out. Observing this sudden, unsettling shift in her temperament, the young man realizes that her motivations are far more dangerous than simple arrogance. He bluntly tells her to leave, concluding that someone driven by such volatile spite has no place in a land as unforgiving as this. When she reacts with stunned confusion, he doesn't mince words, explaining that her inability to listen to others makes her a liability. He adds a stinging observation, noting that her current behavior makes it perfectly clear why her previous adventuring party saw fit to expel her. He leans in, his gaze hardening as he delivers a final, sobering truth about their environment. He warns her that in the demon lands, things almost never go according to plan, and her habit of lashing out whenever she is inconvenienced will only lead to her demise. Stung by his blunt assessment, she turns on her heel and storms away into the brush, her face flushed with a mixture of indignation and shame. She huffs with every step, the weight of his words clearly hitting closer to home than she cares to admit. As she disappears into the distance, the young girl with horns looks on, asking if the cleric is truly departing for good. He simply confirms it with a short, resolute nod, his mind already made up about the necessity of her departure. He watches the spot where she vanished, his expression somber as he reflects on the harsh reality of their world. To him, the frontier is a place for survival and growth, leaving no room for those consumed by the poisonous desire for vengeance. He reflects on his decision, looking out into the dense foliage, convinced that the capital is the only place where Jennifer might find a semblance of safety. By the following morning, the journey resumes as a heavy boot strikes the earth, the vast, untamed wilderness stretching out before them under the early light. As they prepare to move, the young woman reminds him to secure the sword that once belonged to the fallen PJ, while he adjusts his heavy pack, declaring their intent to push further into the arid reaches of the desert. Reaching for a pouch at his side, he explains that he has secured a vital companion for their trek, a creature that will ensure they can find their way back should the shifting sands disorient them. Inside the small enclosure, a leaf bird rests in a deep slumber, its natural homing instinct and tendency to sleep in the dark making it the perfect living compass for their expedition. With a grunt of effort, he heaves himself upward, the weight of his supplies shifting as he signals the start of their march into the unknown. Suddenly, he freezes, his hand tensing as a strange sensation or sound catches his attention, causing his companion to call out his name in concern. Peering through the dense undergrowth at a dark opening in the rocks, she whispers a hesitant question, her eyes wide as they both sense something unusual lurking just ahead. She stood over the figure lying motionless among the rocks, watching as the woman's shallow breathing struggled against the weight of her injuries. The young man knelt beside the fallen stranger to assess the damage, noting that while she still drew breath, her leg had suffered a clean break. His companion watched with a mix of concern and relief as he pondered whether they should delay their journey to ensure her safety. He didn't hesitate to act, channeling his recovery magic into her broken form until the worst of the injuries began to knit back together. With the immediate danger to her life neutralized, he felt confident that she would recover in time. The girl with the dark horns remained focused on their mission despite the delay, insisting that they proceed to the desert as originally intended. The young man agreed, unwilling to let any further distractions stall their exploration of the arid wastes. As they began their trek into the dunes, she reasoned that the cleric would likely find her own way back once she regained consciousness. The young man took a moment to steady his breathing against the oppressive sun as the heat of the desert finally enveloped them. Suddenly, She cried out his name in warning as the ground behind him began to heave and buckle. A nightmare erupted from the shifting sands. A colossal worm, its circular maw lined with rows of jagged teeth, loomed over him like a living tower of hunger. The behemoth loomed over him, but Makio steeled his resolve, gripping the blade he had inherited from the fallen skeleton. He knew that if he didn't deal with this threat now, his journey through the desert would be impossible. With a single, fluid motion, he unleashed the sword's power, carving through the creature's armored segments as if they were nothing more than silk. As the remains of the beast settled into the sand, he stared at the weapon in disbelief, realizing that what PJ had considered weak was actually a tool of incredible destruction, a sentiment echoed by Cher's wide-eyed awe at the instant kill. Turning his attention back to the journal he carried, he noted the discrepancy between the written warnings of weak monsters and the reality of their encounter. Though a cryptic note about never touching poisonous plants seemed out of place in this barren wasteland. Deciding to press on despite the oddities, the pair resumed their trek across the shifting dunes, eager to see what else the desert held. Their journey soon led them to a massive, jagged outcropping of rock or bone jutting from the sand, where they paused to investigate the strange landmark. Suddenly, a shadow passed over them, drawing their gaze upward. While Cher initially mistook the distant shape for a bird, the sheer scale of it suggested something far more unnatural. High above the clouds, they beheld an impossible sight, a massive island suspended in the heavens, anchored to the world below by colossal, heavy chains. Makio looks at the massive structure ahead, wondering if these are the ruins mentioned in PJ's notebook. With a determined look, he calls out to Cher that it's time to move. As they approach, the sheer scale of the anchor becomes apparent. A single link of the colossal chain towers over them like a mountain of metal, half buried in the shifting desert sands. He reaches out, his hand looking minuscule against the dark, weathered surface. The material is foreign to him, cold and unfathomably dense, leaving him to wonder what could have possibly forged such a thing. Despite the daunting size, he declares their intent to reach the floating island above. Beside him, Cher raises a fist, her silent resolve matching his own as they prepare for the ascent. The climb begins in earnest. Every movement is a struggle against gravity, their breath coming in heavy, rhythmic gasps as they haul themselves upward. He pauses, sweat beading on his forehead as the reality of the task sets in. Looking up at the near-vertical incline of the massive link, he realizes that this journey will be far more grueling than he initially anticipated. Behind him, Cher stumbles, her strength flagging under the intense physical demand. He grits his teeth, noting that even the rigorous training he endured in the Demon Lands hasn't fully prepared him for a trial of this magnitude. He considers their options, recalling how Cher's attempts to use magic were violently repelled by the chain. He had thought to coat himself in mana to gain a better grip, but the metal seems to thirst for it, threatening to drain his reserves and leave him helpless if he relies on anything but his own physical strength. He continues the grueling ascent, his muscles burning as he hauls himself and his gear up the massive, cold links of the chain. Beside him, the girl struggles with equal determination, the wind whipping around them as they hang suspended over the vast emptiness below. As they climb higher, the underside of the floating island looms above like a jagged stone ceiling, the final stretch of the chain disappearing into the rock. The physical toll is evident in their ragged breathing and the sweat pouring down their faces. She gasps out that there are only a few more steps to go, while he grinds his teeth, whispering a desperate encouragement that they are almost there. With a final, agonizing surge of strength, his hand crests the edge, fingers digging into the solid earth of the island surface. They both heave themselves over the precipice and collapse onto the soft grass, their bodies finally giving way to the overwhelming fatigue. He manages a weak exclamation of triumph, declaring that they have finally made it before the sheer exhaustion takes hold. After a moment of recovery, he lifts his head, his eyes widening as he catches sight of something unexpected in the distance. Before them lies the silent remains of a town, its stone structures partially reclaimed by massive, twisting tree roots that snake through the doorways and over the walls. They begin to wander through the desolate streets, noting the presence of houses and furniture that hint at a once vibrant culture. He observes that while the signs of life are everywhere, the place now seems to be nothing more than a collection of silent, ancient ruins. He observed the eerie stillness of the abandoned settlement, noting the absence of any human remains or signs of struggle. It seemed as though the entire island had simply been vacated, leaving behind only empty structures and a heavy, unnatural silence. Looking out over the desolate landscape, he couldn't help but wonder if the inhabitants had just vanished into thin air, leaving their homes to be reclaimed by the forest. The thought weighed heavily on him as he continued his search for answers. As they moved further into the overgrown ruins, they came across a series of weathered stone markers standing amidst the tall grass, their purpose becoming clear as they drew closer. He stopped before a particularly prominent stone, realizing with a start that it was a grave, meticulously placed within the ruins of the town. The inscription carved into the cold stone was clear. Peter Jefferson rested there. This revelation sent a jolt of confusion through him, and he quickly pulled out the journal he had found earlier, marked with the same initials. If this was where Peter Jefferson was buried, he struggled to understand the implications of what they had found before. His mind raced back to the skeleton they had discovered in the cave, draped in tattered robes, and he questioned the identity of those remains if the man himself lay here. The identity of those silent remained a puzzle that neither of them could solve. Cher admitted her ignorance with a blunt shrug, while Makio could only offer a thoughtful hum, his mind racing to connect the grave they had found with the bones in the cave. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the floating island's chains, the mystery only seemed to deepen. Realizing they would find no more answers in the fading light, they agreed to set up camp and rest until morning. Seeking shelter within a root-choked ruin, they soon felt the biting chill of the high altitude. Makio shivered, remarking on the sudden drop in temperature, prompting Cher to suggest a practical, if bold, solution: huddling together for warmth. She didn't wait for his consent, lunging forward with a mischievous grin to wrap her arms around him. He was caught completely off guard, his face flushing as he felt the sudden, close contact of his companion. Beneath the watchful gaze of the full moon, his frantic pleas for her to stop were met with a stubborn refusal. Their playful bickering echoed through the desolate ruins of the town, a brief moment of levity in a place filled with ghosts. A small bird circles high above the clouds, its chirps echoing through the vast, open sky as it guides the way. Watching its flight from the dunes below, the young man points toward the horizon, signaling to his companion that their guide has spotted their destination. Having found no further secrets to uncover on the floating island in the sky, the pair begins the long trek back toward the familiar shelter of the cave. Once inside, the weight of the day's journey settles in. He grumbles about being covered in sand while his companion admits to being completely exhausted. While they share a quiet meal, he contemplates using his magic to warm some water for a much-needed bath later that evening. Suddenly, a faint sound from the shadows catches his attention, causing him to freeze and listen intently. Turning toward the back of the cavern, he is startled to find the unconscious cleric lying amidst the rocks, her presence their complete mystery. He rushes to her side, his alarm growing as he sees the severity of her injuries, and he urgently calls out for his companion's help. He stares at the newcomer with a mix of confusion and suspicion, questioning why she remains in their sanctuary. Beside her, the horned girl continues to tend to the woman's shoulder, while the cleric can only offer a weak, non-committal response. She averts her gaze, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of shame and exhaustion as the weight of her situation settles in. The cleric finally confesses her predicament, explaining that she is trapped. The moment she stepped into the surrounding woods, the very environment turned hostile, with beasts and flora alike launching a relentless assault that stripped her of all sense of direction. Observing her slumped posture, the young man notes how utterly defeated she appears by the ordeal of the demon lands. He presses further, questioning how a cleric could be in such a state without using her own restorative arts. With a weary sigh, she admits that her reserves are completely spent, having exhausted every drop of her magical essence during her desperate flight. The youth decides to retire for the night, scratching his head as he announces his intention to sleep, feeling the weight of the day's events. Before settling in, he gives the woman a firm instruction to earn her keep by maintaining the fire throughout the night, pointedly reminding her that she has been consuming their supplies without leave. She looks up in startled silence as he tucks himself into his bedroll. The following morning, the first rays of light filter through the trees, and he rises with a long, groggy yawn, stretching his limbs to shake off the remnants of sleep. Upon fully waking, he is surprised to find the cleric still sitting by the hearth, her face pale from the vigil. He realizes that she actually followed his command, keeping the flames alive through the entire night without a moment of rest. He listens quietly as the woman confesses her despair, admitting that she has been useless since entering this dangerous territory and lacks the means to even return home. In response to her plight, he offers a tool for survival, presenting a paralysis staff and explaining that it could provide her the opening needed to reach the safety of the entrance stream. She stares at the offered weapon, her internal conflict visible as she realizes that simply running away isn't what she truly wants. Suddenly, she drops to the floor in a deep bow, pleading with him to allow her to remain under his roof for a time, swearing that she will find a way to compensate him for the stay. The young man is visibly startled by this sudden display of humility and determination from the woman, who had previously spoken only of vengeance. She looks up, her eyes burning with a new fire as she admits she is fully aware of her own inadequacies, but fears that leaving now would mean she would never grow. He meets her gaze with a piercing question, asking if this desire to change has supplanted her earlier drive for revenge against those who cast her out. She begins to recount her history, explaining how being abandoned as a child led her to a church that encouraged her to seek freedom, a path that eventually led to her becoming an adventurer and her subsequent betrayal. She confesses that her talk of revenge was merely a fabrication, a convenient excuse she had conjured to mask her true feelings. Continuing her vulnerable admission, she acknowledges the painful truth. No one truly needs her, and she has been stubbornly refusing to face her own inadequacies. He listens in silence, his expression unreadable as he processes her sudden honesty. Breaking the silence, the young man questions her true purpose in this dangerous territory, reminding her that they are currently the only ones there. In response, she looks at him with newfound admiration, explaining how incredible it is that he and his companion live so freely in such a hostile environment, seemingly independent of anyone else's approval. He can only stare back, caught off guard by her sudden praise. Driven by this realization, she bows low in a gesture of deep respect and desperation, pleading with him to take her under his wing and teach her the ways of a true adventurer. The request leaves him visibly flustered. He quickly clarifies that he isn't an adventurer at all, but simply a man exploring his own land out of curiosity. Despite her plea, he remains firm, telling her that if she truly wishes to pursue this path, she must do so on her own. He watches as Jennifer, undeterred by his refusal to train her, turns her pleas toward Cher, begging to be taught the simple craft of baking bread. Cher, however, seems less than enthusiastic, declaring her intention to handle things on her own. She continues to press her case, but he interjects with a weary sigh, urging both women to find a way to coexist peacefully as they continue their spirited exchange. He eventually relents when she asks to use a corner of the room as her sleeping quarters, telling her she is welcome to stay for a time and act as she pleases. She offers him a small, ancient-looking coin as an advance payment for his hospitality, leaving him to wonder how he suddenly found himself with another permanent housemate. She explains that the coin was a trophy from the only foe she managed to best in the treacherous demon land, a terrifying female zombie that still haunts her memories. She watches as he examines the currency closely, noting its age and rarity, as he has never encountered a gold coin of this particular design before. He reflects on the day's strange turn of events as night settles over the frozen wilderness, the full moon casting a cold glow over the landscape and leaving him with a lingering sense of unease. He continues his work in the silence, the sound of a sharp blade being drawn across would echoing through the room as the day finally comes to a close. He focused intently on the wood, explaining to Cher that he was crafting a staff to trade at the training facility. Jennifer, however, looked down at a discarded, poorly made piece, dismissing it as little more than a freebie. She quickly corrected him, her eyes sharp as she identified the object as a paralysis staff. She insisted that as a debuffing tool, it was an excellent weapon and far from cheap, leaving the young man and his companion stunned by her expertise. She watched as he could only offer a sheepish smile in response, surprised that his casual work held such hidden potential. He and the others gathered at the mouth of their cave, dwelling shortly after, as Jennifer waved a cheerful farewell. She called out for them to take care, her silhouette framed by the bright daylight of the forest. As she faded into the distance, Cher inquired about the woman's plans, wondering why she wasn't coming with them. He explained that she had decided to stay behind to seek her own adventures, though he admitted he didn't fully understand her sudden change of heart. She looked thoughtful, noting how the cleric seemed to have a spirit much like her own. While she was lost in thought, he sighed inwardly, reflecting on how the woman had simply pushed her way into their lives and then departed just as abruptly. He arrived at the trading post later that day, where the manager greeted him with surprising news. The man revealed that the staff brought in previously had sold for a remarkably high price, and there were already urgent requests for him to produce more. He acknowledges that while it isn't a tome on time and space, he has found a magic book that might suit the young man's needs. Makio listens intently, grateful for the lead. Following the trader's suggestion, the youth discovers a beginner's textbook. He carefully turns the pages, examining the intricate magic circle emblazoned on the cover. He realizes that despite only covering basic effects and circles, the book is a crucial tool for grasping the underlying logic of magic. With the book and other essentials like shipbuilding tools and clothing in hand, the two depart from the trading post. They wave a friendly farewell as they begin the trek back to their camp. Back at their cave shelter, he loses himself in the text. Even while eating, his focus remains entirely on the diagrams and explanations within the beginner's guide. This study allows him to analyze the magic circles on the weapons left behind by PEJ. He begins to see a pattern, categorizing the symbols into elemental systems like fire, water, earth, and wind. Because many of the circles on the old armor remain unidentifiable, he decides to copy them onto paper. He hopes that documenting these mysterious patterns will prove useful for future reference. As he continues his diligent research, Cher pops her head into the room. She questions why he spends so much time reading instead of going out to hunt monsters, clearly puzzled by his scholarly approach. She had left him to his thoughts after their tense exchange, and now he spoke firmly to the woman before him. explaining that their journeys were not the same and that she was free to pursue her own battles if she wished. The cleric nodded, accepting the reality of his words as she prepared to move on from their temporary alliance. Stepping out from the shadows of the cave, she felt the fresh air of the world she was returning to, her resolve hardened. Turning back one last time, she offered a sincere word of thanks, specifically mentioning the clothes he had managed to find for her to replace her tattered robes. He remained still, his expression unreadable as he absorbed her gratitude in silence. With a casual shrug of his shoulders, he muttered that it was no trouble at all, claiming the task had simply been on his way during his own errands. Beyond the confines of their temporary shelter, the dense forest and rugged terrain of the frontier beckoned, vast and unforgiving. Her boots crunched against the dry earth as she took her first steps toward a new destination, leaving the young man behind. As she continues her solitary trek, a new presence makes itself known within the dense woodland. This traveler, their face partially obscured by a mask and a deep hood, stands ready with a massive, long-handled hammer gripped firmly in one hand. Weighted down by a bulging backpack, the youth gazes out with wide, observant eyes, a silent sentinel in the heart of the wilderness. Cher returns from her excursion, calling out to her companion with a bright smile despite the dark stains on her clothes. She quickly reassures him that the blood isn't hers, but rather from a haze turtle she encountered, before presenting a mysterious stone ring she discovered. The artifact is heavy and cold, etched with intricate lightning patterns that suggest it was crafted by hands rather than shaped by nature. He examines the object closely, flipping through his records to find a match, but finds that the stone remains inert even when he attempts to channel his own mana into it. Consulting an ancient tome, he realizes the carvings are identical to those found in certain ruins, and she confirms the piece was found deep within the local swamp. While they discuss the discovery, the cleric lies sprawled on the grass nearby, completely spent after a grueling swimming lesson. He looks toward the horizon with a determined expression, concluding that the swamp must hold hidden ruins and deciding they should investigate immediately. Preparing for the trek, he enchants his own arm with light magic, his muscles bulging as he readies himself for whatever dangers the swamp might hold. He plunges into the murky depths of the swamp with a sudden splash, leaving the two women behind on the grassy bank. Beneath the surface, the young man propels himself forward, his right fist glowing with a concentrated magical light to guide his way through the dim water. Schools of strange, prehistoric-looking fish and armored crustaceans scatter as the intruder passes through their silent domain. Suddenly, a massive predator with a maw full of jagged teeth lunges from the shadows, forcing him to brace for an unexpected confrontation. Realizing that a prolonged struggle with the beast would be a waste of time, he decides to use his magic to generate a powerful downward current, propelling himself toward the lakebed to bypass the creature entirely. The force of the magical surge carries him deeper, but the sudden movement triggers an unforeseen reaction in the silt below. Thick clouds of mud billow upward, completely obscuring his vision and making it impossible to see what lies further down in the darkness. He pauses, realizing that while his magic might help uncover ruins buried in the sediment, the resulting murk is a significant obstacle that requires a more refined approach than simple brute force. He breaks the surface of the murky swamp water with a sharp gasp, lungs burning for air after his deep dive. Stepping back onto the muddy bank, he begins to dry himself while explaining his findings to his companions. He admits that while he attempted to dig into the lakebed in search of ruins, the sediment he stirred up made visibility impossible, though he intends to try again once the silt settles. His gaze suddenly sharpens, narrowing as he senses a presence nearby that doesn't belong to their small group. Heavy footsteps crunch against the damp earth, signaling the approach of a stranger from the shadows of the surrounding foliage. Alerted by a call from his companion, a young traveler is seen emerging from the brush, clad in a hooded cloak and carrying a massive, long-handled hammer that seems far too heavy for their slight frame. The newcomer explains that they heard rumors of people occupying this land and came to investigate, prompting a wary greeting from the young landlord who questions the purpose of their visit. Before the conversation can proceed, a gelatinous river slime lunges from the water's edge, catching the traveler completely off guard and sending them stumbling backward with a frantic cry. As the traveler flails in the water with the creature, the cleric watches with wide, trembling eyes, but the young man remains strangely detached, suggesting they wait until the stranger is actually in danger of drowning before intervening. He decides the time for observation has passed and lunges forward, his hand plunging into the murky depths of the river. With a firm grip on the traveler's sodden cloak, he hauls the struggling figure toward the safety of the muddy bank. As the traveler collapses onto the shore, the hood falls back to reveal a young woman, drenched and gasping desperately for breath as the water drains from her lungs. He stares in brief surprise at the realization that the traveler is a woman, while she continues to heave and cough, her face flushed from the near drowning. Between ragged coughs, she manages a weak apology, but he offers no comfort, bluntly stating that those who cannot defend themselves against simple slimes have no place in such a dangerous territory. As Cher and Jennifer join them, the woman recovers enough to explain her presence, revealing she traveled here specifically seeking the legendary high-quality wands rumored to be produced on the island. She desperately pleads with him to sell her the wands, but he remains stoic, informing her that for the time being, such items are strictly reserved for military training facilities. He clarifies that gold holds no interest for him in this wilderness, but he leaves a door open, asking if she possesses anything of genuine value she might be willing to trade instead. He peers into the traveler's overstuffed backpack, his gaze scanning the various tools and supplies. The young woman, still trembling slightly, encourages him to search for anything he might find worthy of a trade. He pulls out a bound volume and begins to leaf through it, curious about whose history it might contain. He listens as she quickly explains that the book is a record of the very land they stand upon, her expression earnest in the hope that this knowledge will satisfy him. She watches him as he schemes the pages, noting mentions of impossible sights like floating islands and monsters that tower over mountains, leading him to remark that the author had a wild imagination. He proposes a trade of 10 such history books for a single wand, deciding to take the current book as a down payment while promising to have the wands ready for her next visit. He observes her reaction as she is left stunned and flustered by the proposal, stammering about the difficulty of returning and the sheer imbalance of the exchange. She falls silent as he ignores her complaints, instead leaning in to deliver a stern ultimatum regarding the need for absolute secrecy, warning that the deal is off if she speaks of it. He gestures toward the unconscious cleric he has been protecting and presents her to the traveler, shifting the focus from their trade to the immediate need for assistance. He issues a stern warning, demanding total silence regarding the secrets of this land. The traveler, however, is paralyzed by the sight of the girl with horns, stammering in disbelief at the presence of the demon tribe. As the silence stretches outside the dark mouth of the cave, she remains speechless, her eyes wide with the weight of what she has just discovered. Breaking the tension, he begins delegating tasks, instructing the horned girl to select magic stones for the new wands while asking the cleric to scout for potential trade goods outside. The cleric, still recovering her composure, offers a hesitant nod of understanding. As the others begin their work in the background, he turns his attention back to the visitor, questioning the true purpose behind her urgent need for such powerful weapons. She explains that a revolt has broken out among bandits to the west, necessitating superior armaments to quell the uprising. He observes that such internal strife is often lucrative for those involved, then catches her off guard by asking if she is truly a merchant, a question that leaves her flustered and defensive. Sensing something is amiss, the horned girl pulls him aside to whisper her suspicions, pointing out that the traveler's gear is of such high quality it likely came from a noble's carriage. She bluntly suggests that their guest might be nothing more than a common thief. He ponders the accusation, feeling a strange sense of familiarity as he looks at the girl, yet he ultimately decides that her background matters little as long as the trade remains beneficial. Overhearing the doubt, she erupts in a desperate shout, vehemently denying the accusation and insisting that she is no criminal. She stood before them, the weight of their scrutiny heavy in the air as Makio and Cher waited for an explanation. Makio leaned in, his voice firm as he demanded to know the true origin of the high-quality equipment she carried, causing her to break into a nervous sweat. Stuttering, she claimed to be a noble from East Kenya, sent by her uncle, the Lord, to procure weapons amidst the crisis. Cher added that East Kenya, though often misunderstood as part of their own land, sits on the border of Elven territory, a fact that seemed to give Makio pause. He processed the story, concluding that a rebellion must have forced the noble's daughter to seek armaments elsewhere. Yet he urged her to flee for her own safety. She countered fiercely, insisting that the people of her land had no such luxury and were bound to their home. Cher watched her closely, noting that those from East Kenya were notorious for their reckless bravery, a trait often dismissed by outsiders as mere savagery. Makio suggested that perhaps her uncle had used the mission as a pretext to send her away from the danger, a theory she rejected by boasting of her status as her land's finest warrior. Despite the tension, he felt a wave of relief, knowing the items hadn't been obtained through theft. With the conversation concluded, she prepared to depart, sternly warning them to keep their encounter a secret as she disappeared into the distance. Once she was gone, the group resumed their trek through the murky swamp, where they soon stumbled upon the massive, bleached remains of a gargantuan creature. The young man had spent the previous day scouring the massive, sun-bleached remains, but the ruins had yielded no secrets of value. Instead of returning to the swamp today, he chose to stay behind and read, prompting his companions to ask if he was truly finished with his search. He turned his attention to a weathered history book, hoping to find answers within its aged pages. The text revealed a haunting past, describing how this very land was once a thriving nation before its inhabitants vanished in massive numbers without a trace. Looking out over the desolate, overgrown hills, the weight of that lost civilization felt palpable. The chronicles spoke of ancient faiths where deer were revered as divine messengers and whispered of legendary floating islands that were eventually consumed by gargantuan beasts. As he read on, he began to suspect that the very cave they occupied might have served as a shelter during the frequent natural disasters that plagued the region. However, his mind kept drifting back to the traveler's tale of East Kenya, a fertile land perpetually scarred by the fires of rebellion and war. He continues to study the ancient records, which depict the 4 legendary heroes who once reclaimed this territory. However, the text reveals a grim truth. The very adventurers who fought for the land eventually became the catalyst for a devastating internal conflict. Absorbing this heavy history, he looks away from the pages with a weary expression. The realization that the past is far more complicated than simple legends makes him mutter that the entire situation is starting to feel like a massive hassle. While he contemplates the burdens of the past, the sky outside begins to darken ominously. Thick, black clouds roll across the landscape, serving as a grim omen that another storm is rapidly approaching the land. The wooden walls of the outpost stand silent, a testament to the peace of the region. A voice from within confirms that no mobilization orders have reached this remote corner of the world, despite the rumors circulating elsewhere. He listens as the young man recounts a warning from a noblewoman about a rebellion in a neighboring territory. The bearded manager admits he has heard rumors of an adventurer's uprising, but points out that their isolation usually keeps them far from such political storms. He continues to reassure his young guests, suggesting that the rebellion has likely already been quelled and is nothing for them to lose sleep over, given the distance from the capital. They depart shortly after, the youth feeling a sense of relief as he considers that perhaps his anxieties were misplaced and the world is safer than he feared. She suddenly looks up, her voice breaking the quiet as she notices the first heavy drops of a coming storm hitting the dusty path. Within moments, the heavens open, and a torrential downpour lashes the rugged mountainside, turning the peaceful landscape into a gray blur of falling water and rising mist. They scramble to protect their belongings and secure their shelter, the young man cursing the intensity of the rain as he realizes the danger it poses to his newly planted fields if the deluge continues. She offers to head out and inspect the perimeter while he stays to secure the entrance, and he nods in grim agreement as the storm rages on around them. The torrential downpour hammers against the stalks of the crops, each heavy drop striking the earth with a dull, rhythmic thud. He watches the water level rise with growing concern, realizing that the fields will soon be submerged if the deluge continues. Determined to save the harvest, he decides to intervene with magic, intending to force the excess water deep into the soil. Channeling his energy, he stands firm against the elements as the magic takes hold, redirecting the rushing currents around a central mound to prevent the soil from washing away. Despite his efforts, the storm shows no signs of relenting, blanketing the entire forest in a gray, watery veil. Returning to the shelter, he delivers the grim news to his companions, explaining that while the immediate fields are safe, the surrounding land is completely flooded, halting any plans for expansion. The young women listen intently, their faces reflecting the gravity of their isolation. This environmental setback carries a heavy price, as it becomes clear that their self-sufficiency has been compromised, forcing them to rely on trade for essential grains and vegetables in the coming months. As the storm intensifies into a full-blown hurricane the following day, a realization shared by the young woman with horns, he turns his attention to the journals left behind by the skeleton, PJ. Since the weather keeps them trapped indoors, he proposes a new project, crafting defensive traps based on the ancient magic circles found within the pages. He begins the delicate task of carving an explosion trap onto a wooden board, carefully omitting a single line from the intricate design to ensure the device remains dormant until they are ready to deploy. He contemplates the destructive potential of his new traps, envisioning them hidden under leaves to cripple even the largest of beasts. Suddenly, a thunderous blast echoes through the air, jolting him from his work. From the doorway, the horned girl urgently beckons him to come outside and see what has happened. Stepping into the rain, they gaze toward the horizon where a massive, dark silhouette looms over the forest. The cleric wonders if a mountain had always been there, but the young man realizes with horror that the land itself is shifting. The true scale of the threat becomes clear as a colossal, shaggy behemoth rises, its form so vast it dwarfs the ancient trees. As the titan strides forward, the very air screams with the force of its movement, snapping trunks like twigs and sending debris flying. They observe that the creature's sheer mass is warping the weather, drawing the lightning and gale-force winds toward its peak as if it were the eye of the storm itself. In its wake, the lesser denizens of the forest, from heavy-shelled turtles to agile winged predators, flee in a desperate scramble for survival. He feels his blood run cold as he recalls a passage from the old notebook. This is the legendary magical beast that emerges only once every 3 months to reshape the world. He stared in disbelief at the sheer scale of the destruction, wondering how such a massive entity could have remained hidden until now. The creature's mere presence was throwing the entire ecosystem into a violent upheaval, and he could feel the weight of the chaos pressing down on them. Around them, the forest's apex predators were reduced to helpless playthings. A massive bear was tossed through the air like a ragdoll, while a giant centipede struggled against the overwhelming force. The young man and his companions could only watch in horror as the natural order crumbled in an instant. The devastation intensified as the tornado's reach expanded, hoisting serpents and crocodilians into the sky only to be incinerated by bolts of lightning. It was a slaughter of titans, leaving no doubt about the beast's absolute dominance over the land. Observing that even the most ferocious monsters were fleeing toward the north, he came to the grim realization that their current shelter was no longer safe. The cave walls were already beginning to buckle and collapse under the strain of the tremors, threatening to bury them alive if they stayed a moment longer. With a look of grim determination, he declared that they would follow the monster's lead and head north immediately. There was no time left for hesitation or second-guessing if they hoped to survive the night against such a force of nature. Behind them, the mountain-sized behemoth continued its slow, inexorable march, its massive form wreathed in swirling winds and debris. The very earth groaned under its weight as it reshaped the landscape in its wake, leaving nothing but ruin behind. He quickly began issuing urgent orders to ensure their safe passage through the storm, instructing Jennifer to secure herself to him with a rope and urging Chell to use her magic to bolster her legs for the sprint. Every second was precious as they prepared to abandon their home and face the elements with all their might. Moments later, they plunged into the heart of the gale, with the young man carrying the weakened cleric on his back while the horned girl sprinted alongside them. They ran with everything they had, desperate to put distance between themselves and the approaching titan that threatened to consume everything in its path. He leads the way through the torrential downpour, his companions close behind as they navigate a path littered with the remains of fallen creatures. Urging them forward, he shouts over the roar of the storm, insisting they maintain their northward course despite the treacherous terrain. The group finally breaks through the tree line, only to find themselves standing at the edge of a vast, desolate wasteland illuminated by jagged bolts of lightning. They pause for a moment to catch their breath, their chests heaving as they take in the grim reality of the landscape before them. Across the barren expanse, the earth itself seems to groan as monsters are crushed under unseen forces and the sky erupts in violent flashes. Staring at the devastation, he can only think that the scene before him resembles nothing less than the end of the world. Realizing the wasteland offers no sanctuary, he quickly decides they must retreat toward the forest to find a more secure hiding place. Suddenly, the ground gives way beneath them, sending the trio sliding down a steep embankment amidst a chorus of startled cries. He groans, clutching his head as the world stops spinning. Beside him, the girl is equally dazed, the impact of their fall still echoing through their bones. They find themselves huddled against a cold, brick wall, the air thick with dust and the lingering shock of their sudden descent. Looking upward, he sees a distant circle of light, realizing they have tumbled into a deep, vertical shaft. He wonders aloud if this is an ancient well or perhaps the forgotten ruins of a civilization that once dared to inhabit the demonic realm. The stone walls around them are weathered and silent, offering no answers to their predicament. A sharp, throbbing pain suddenly flares in his lower limb, drawing his gaze downward. His heart sinks as he stares at his boot, convinced by the agonizing sensation that his leg has been snapped by the fall. Sensing his distress, she moves behind him, her fingers working quickly at the bindings that still tether them. She reassures him, promising to have the rope undone in just a moment so they can assess their injuries properly. Once freed, she calls his name softly, checking to see if he is still with her. He exhales a shaky breath, the simple realization that he is still breathing bringing a small measure of relief. She stands, surveying their surroundings and noting that, at the very least, the stone walls will provide them with a much-needed sanctuary from the harsh elements outside. As the storm rages above, a small fire is kindled, casting flickering shadows against the ancient masonry. The sound of thunder rolls through the shaft, a violent reminder of the chaos they just escaped. Cher stands near the entrance of their makeshift camp, her expression solemn as she listens to the tempest. Despite the relative safety of their stone enclosure, he remains on high alert, his eyes narrowing as he focuses on the sounds from above. Even here, in the heart of the wasteland, the rhythmic thud of heavy footsteps vibrates through the earth, suggesting that the danger has not yet passed. She bows her head, her voice trembling as she apologizes for being a burden during their frantic flight. He looks back at her, his face grim, and warns that their ordeal is far from over. They cannot afford to relax while the threat still looms over them. He lies motionless, his eyes closed as a voice calls out his name through the darkness. A sudden, blinding flash of light cuts through the void of his unconsciousness. A gentle poke to his head accompanies the persistent demand for him to wake, while nearby, the rhythmic drip of water into a pool echoes in the silence. His eyes snap open in a startle, finding the cleric leaning over him with an urgent expression as she repeats her plea for him to rouse himself. Testing his weight, he is shocked to find his previously injured foot completely mended. The cleric explains that she used her healing magic to repair the damage, leaving him to wonder just how long he had been unconscious in this damp place. She doesn't wait for his confusion to clear, instead gesturing toward a dark opening in the stone wall and beckoning him to follow her deeper into the structure. Taking up a torch to light their way, he follows her into the mouth of the cavern, his mind racing to keep up with her sudden movement as they leave the landing behind. As they venture deeper into the stone corridor, he marvels at the construction of the passageway, questioning if this strange well was once part of a vast underground water system. He leads the way through the cavern, the torchlight flickering against the damp walls where strange, luminous clusters cling to the rock. Seeing Jennifer reach out, he quickly warns her not to touch the glowing mushrooms carelessly, though she can't help but marvel at their ethereal beauty. Continuing their descent, the group emerges into a vast chamber containing a silent, underground lake, its far shores lost in the impenetrable gloom. Suddenly, Cher calls out to him, presenting a peculiar stone artifact she discovered, its surface etched with ancient, circular patterns. He recognizes the object immediately as a thunderstone and asks where she found it, to which she calmly explains it was being held by a skeleton nearby. Tucked away in a shallow alcove, the remains of a long-dead traveler sit in eternal repose, draped in tattered, gray robes. Stunned by the sight of the desiccated corpse, he can only stare in silence while Cher, undeterred, suggests they search the area for any other useful relics. Among the belongings of the deceased, they find a weathered volume that he identifies as an old-fashioned adventurer's guidebook, its pages holding secrets from a bygone era. He holds the circular stone up to the light, comparing it to a detailed sketch in the old guidebook. The text is explicit, warning the reader never to lose the dungeon key, a revelation that changes their understanding of the artifact entirely. Upon hearing this, Jennifer reflects on her past, mentioning that her previous adventuring party was renowned for conquering the deepest levels of the capital's dungeons. While Makio listens intently, Cher admits with a hint of curiosity that she has never actually been inside one. Their attention shifts back to the weathered pages, where a line of messy handwriting catches their eyes. It poses a chilling and confusing scenario, starting with the words, "If the dungeon is stolen by a..." The group falls into a perplexed silence, the sheer absurdity of the written warning hanging heavy in the air as they stare down at the book. He finally breaks the tension, questioning the very logic of the text. The idea of an entire dungeon being stolen seems like a physical impossibility. Sensing that the massive magical beast presence has finally vanished from the area, they agree it is time to depart. As they make their way toward the light of the exit, Cher continues to protest, unable to wrap her head around the bizarre claim they just read. The stone well stands silent in the heart of the forest, its ancient masonry entwined with thick, gnarled roots. From its depths, the young man hauls himself upward, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as his fingers find purchase on the rough stone edge. Once he is safely on solid ground, he observes that the sky has cleared and the colossal presence of the magical beast is finally gone. Behind him, his companions begin their own ascent from the subterranean refuge. The surrounding woods, however, bear the scars of the Titan's passage, with massive trunks snapped like twigs and the undergrowth crushed into the dirt. Surveying the devastation, he suggests they make their way back home, though he cannot help but remark on the ruinous state of the environment. A deeper concern flickers across his face as he contemplates whether the very layout of the land has been permanently altered, his gaze falling upon the lifeless remains of creatures caught in the wake of the destruction. The gravity of their situation is momentarily interrupted by the loud, insistent rumbling of his stomach, a reminder that he has not tasted food since the previous day. His companion's expressions mirror his own growing hunger. He looks toward the carcass of a fallen beast, but the thought of scavenging such a creature brings a wave of hesitation. Despite their magical nature, the idea of consuming them is far from appealing. He offers some camus seeds to his companions, suggesting they eat them to endure the hunger for now. The girls look disappointed by the meager offering, but they accept it as their only option in the devastated forest. Stepping into the nearby cave, he is met with a sight of total disarray. The interior is cluttered with debris and large stones, making the space nearly impassable and far from the refuge they had hoped for. Because of the rubble, the horned girl points out that they cannot even access the wheat stored within. The cleric agrees, stating that their first priority must be to make the space habitable, though the young man suddenly feels a wave of overwhelming fatigue wash over him. After hours of grueling labor, he finally collapses onto the cleared ground as night settles over the forest. They have managed to carve out just enough space for the three of them to lie down, but the effort has left him utterly drained. Beside him, the horned girl also hits her limit, her body slumping forward as she loses the battle with exhaustion. The cleric follows suit, apologizing for her own lack of stamina as she drifts off. Within moments, the sound of heavy snoring fills the small, cleared space, signaling that his companions are deep in sleep. He remains awake for a moment longer, staring into the darkness with heavy eyes. He sighs, longing for the simple luxury of a bath, but the crushing weight of drowsiness makes even the smallest movement feel impossible. Just as sleep begins to take him, a strange sensation in his pocket jolts him back to alertness. He reaches in and pulls out a small metallic disc that seems to be vibrating with a rhythmic heart-like beat. He stares at the gold coin, feeling it throb with a rhythmic pulse that mimics a living heart. Memories of the cleric Jennifer and the ancient mummy who once held this artifact flash through his mind. But his concentration breaks as the smooth metal slips from his grasp. Desperation takes hold as the precious object rolls away across the uneven ground. He lunges forward, shouting for it to stop, but his foot catches on a root, sending him sprawling face first into the dirt. Despite the hard fall, he scrambles back to his feet with a frustrated cry. The coin continues its erratic path, clanking against stones as he desperately tries to close the distance. The chase leads him deeper into the woods, the coin seemingly possessed by a mind of its own as it maintains its momentum. He wonders how a simple piece of gold could possibly roll this far without stopping. A sudden realization strikes him as the terrain begins to change. Ahead, the dense trees give way to the murky waters of swamp, and the coin is heading straight for the edge. With a final, frantic effort, he reaches out to snatch it from the air. His fingers brush against the cold metal, but it slips away once more, plunging into the dark, rippling water. He stands frozen on the bank, watching the small ripples expand from where the treasure vanished. The silence of the swamp is broken only by the soft sound of the water settling. Refusing to let it go, he wades into the muck, searching blindly until his hand finally closes around the coin. Relief washes over him as he pulls it from the depths, but his triumph is short-lived as something large begins to rise from the water behind him. He stands frozen as a luminous figure emerges from the swamp. The woman, an ethereal elf with intricate markings tracing her limbs, floats effortlessly above the water's surface, her presence casting a ghostly glow against the dark forest. The young man's eyes widen in sheer terror, his breath hitching as he stares at the impossible apparition. Ignoring his fright, the spirit narrows her eyes, her gaze drifting toward the distance, as if sensing something far beyond the immediate surroundings. With a grace that defies nature, she begins to walk across the ripples of the pond before turning her back to him, her form shimmering like a fading dream. Because of this eerie encounter, he is left trembling, his face pale and sweat-beaded as the weight of the supernatural event sinks in. By the next morning, the group has gathered at their camp, where he recounts the tale of the translucent elf ghost he encountered by the water. In response, the horned girl bursts into a fit of laughter, teasing him about how terrifying a ghost must be while he sits there, visibly annoyed by her lack of sympathy. While his companion continues to chuckle, the cleric wonders aloud if he might have done something to earn the spirit's resentment, though he quickly dismisses the idea, pleading with the others to take his fear seriously. He watches as the cleric prepares a jar of herbs, questioning her ability to produce holy water on the fly. She calmly explains that as a priestess, such a task is within her power, suggesting that even if the spirit he encountered resents him, the sanctified water will provide a necessary, calming effect. With the jar held firmly, she begins a rhythmic chant, her voice carrying an ancient weight as a soft, ethereal glow begins to emanate from the vessel. The energy intensifies, the hem of her robes fluttering in a phantom breeze generated by the sudden surge of spiritual power. Observing the ritual, he is struck by the grace and precision of her movements, realizing that despite her humble appearance, her training is undeniably that of a true priestess. She soon announces the completion of the task, the water now shimmering with a divine light. He then proposes a practical use for the newly sanctified liquid, suggesting they submerge the mysterious gold coin within it to cleanse any lingering spiritual residue or curses. As the day progresses, the group turns their attention to the state of their sanctuary, beginning the arduous process of restoring the cave after the recent disturbances. The labor is divided among them. While the priestess tends to the washing and the horned girl clears away the debris, he takes on the burden of moving the heavy supplies and crates. Standing at the threshold of their home, he surveys the aftermath with a heavy heart, noting to the priestess that the majority of their food stores have been lost to the chaos. He stands before the pristine suit of armor that once belonged to the skeleton they found, marveling at its perfect condition. Not a single scratch mars the surface of the metal, a testament to its incredible durability despite the passage of time. As he listens, the cleric explains that the material is an exceptionally hard metal, perhaps even legendary adamantite. She warns that equipment of this quality is so rare and powerful that it has been known to drive even the closest of allies to turn against one another in greed. While she speaks, he ponders the nature of the man who once wore it, considering that the owner seemed to be a solitary figure who traveled without any companions. His musings are interrupted when a young girl with horns calls out his name, drawing his attention elsewhere. Turning toward her, he sees that a section of the stone floor has given way, revealing a hidden mechanism beneath the rubble. She points out the collapse, her voice tinged with caution as they look upon the revealed floor. Beneath the dust and broken stone, an intricate magic circle begins to pulse with a faint, ethereal light. Despite the damage to the surrounding structure, the ancient runes remain largely intact and functional. He stares at the glowing sigils in disbelief, realizing that the circle is beginning to activate. He deduces that the floor likely collapsed under the weight of a massive magical beast assault, yet the underlying magic remains dangerously close to triggering. Fearing the unknown power of the device, he quickly ushers his companions away, declaring the room too hazardous to occupy for the time being. They retreat into the cool night air, leaving the mysterious chamber behind as the moon rises over the forest. Later that night, the silence is broken only by the soft sloshing of liquid and the faint clink of glass. The holy water they prepared sits ready, a small beacon of light in the darkness. The young man stares intently at a glass jar, his brow furrowed in concern. Inside, a gold coin sloshes and splashes within the liquid, seemingly possessed by a restless energy. He notes with frustration that Jennifer's holy water appears to have no effect on the coin's erratic movements. He sighs at this persistent phenomenon, feeling the weight of a nightly burden. He wonders if the coin's movement is once again a summons from the elf spirit, a task he finds increasingly troublesome to deal with every single night. He ventures out into the dark, damp swamp, the jar clutched firmly in his hand. He realizes he has pushed even further into the treacherous terrain than he did the previous day, feeling he has no choice but to find a way to put an end to this. He navigates the dense, shadowy woods, but a flicker of doubt crosses his mind. The distance he has traveled is significant, and he begins to worry if he will be able to find his way back to safety through the tangled undergrowth. His foot lands on a thick bed of dried leaves, and the silence of the forest is suddenly broken by a muffled groan rising from beneath his boot. He freezes in response, his eyes widening in shock. The unexpected sound in such a desolate place catches him completely off guard. He hears the voice again moments later, clearly emanating from beneath the layer of foliage. Intrigued and cautious, he deliberately steps on the leaves once more, confirming that the sound is indeed coming from something or someone buried below. He drops to a crouch and begins to clear away the debris, his heart racing. His suspicion is confirmed. There is truly someone hidden beneath the forest floor, and he prepares to uncover the mystery of who they are. He gazes down at the figure he has just unearthed, a woman with long, pale hair and the pointed ears of an elf, lying still upon a bed of dry leaves. While he initially fears she might be a ghost or a zombie, his doubts vanish when she weakly opens her eyes and pleads for help, confirming she is very much alive. Moving with urgency, he supports her and offers a bottle of water, noting that the magical gold coin within has finally stopped its restless vibration. She drinks the water with desperate gulps, the liquid spilling over her lips as she begins to regain her senses. After she manages to stand, he is struck by her impressive height, which far exceeds his own, as she softly apologizes for her disheveled appearance. He asks where she came from, and she reveals that her journey began in the distant country of elves, far beyond the mountain range. When he asks for her name, she introduces herself as Helgen Talone, though she requests that he simply call her Helly. He introduces himself as Makio, the landlord of this magical realm, and upon hearing how she was trapped by the earth, he invites the exhausted traveler to rest at his home. He realizes that the presence before him is no longer just a spiritual projection. Helgen has a solid, physical form, which eases his lingering fears. She explains that while she had been searching for other living souls in her spirit form, she is profoundly grateful that he was the one to finally discover her. Concerned for her well-being, he asks if she is able to stand on her own. She reiterates her thanks, acknowledging how fortunate she was that he found her when he did. As she moves, his eyes catch a glimpse of something troubling on her shoulder, prompting him to ask if she has sustained an injury. A jagged, dark mark is etched into her skin, stark against her pale shoulder. He leans in closer to inspect the blemish, noting that it appears to be a deliberate cut from blade. A dark realization begins to dawn on him as he looks at her with growing concern. Recognizing the pattern, he identifies the mark as a slave magic circle and asks her directly if she is a fugitive who has escaped from bondage. She immediately denies the accusation, her expression hardening as she explains that she has never been anyone's slave, nor has she committed any crimes. She reveals that she fled her homeland only because she was about to be framed for a crime, a punishment intended to force her into slavery, because she had attempted to prevent a senseless war. He wonders aloud if such an act would be considered treason in her land, but she remains firm, stating simply that she chose to flee her country rather than submit to such an injustice. He watched as the ethereal woman knelt before him, her posture humble yet dignified. She promised not to cause any trouble, pleading for permission to remain in his care for a time. She noticed his hesitation as he stared back with a mixture of disbelief and apprehension, a bead of sweat forming as he weighed the implications of her request. He eventually broke the silence as the wind rustled through the surrounding forest, bluntly questioning if she even had the means to pay for her stay. Nearby, the two companions stood by the dark mouth of a cave, watching the exchange with wary curiosity as the group's dynamic shifted once again. They watched as she rose and introduced herself as Helgen with an air of formal grace, though her assertive manner left him with a distinct impression that she was used to being in charge. She stood amongst the group as they reflected on how the demon world seemed to act as a magnet for outcasts and troublemakers, while the realization that they were now harboring a self-proclaimed demon began to sink in. Under the cold light of the full moon, he looked out over the vast, quiet landscape, haunted by a future realization that he had no idea just how much chaos this new arrival would eventually bring into his life. A meager spread of foraged roots and a single, dry flatbread lay atop a broad green leaf, a stark reminder of their dwindling resources. Looking down at the sparse offering, the young man sighed, noting how plain the meal had become now that their wheat supplies were completely exhausted. He continued to fret, wondering if the rest of their provisions had been swept away during the encounter with the giant monster, while the cleric suggested they might need to seek out a training ground to find trade partners. She listened as he asked what they could possibly offer, given that nearly all their food and weaponry had been ruined. In response, she countered that they could craft wands or gather monster furs and potion ingredients. When she inquired about his knowledge of pharmacology, he admitted to only a basic understanding, prompting her to excitedly suggest the production of specialized elf potions. The spectral elf remained silent for a moment, her expression unreadable as she processed the conversation. Suddenly, she let out a light-hearted laugh, leading the youth to eagerly ask if she possessed the skill to brew healing potions as well. He watched as the spectral elf dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand, insisting that brewing potions was a small price to pay for her stay. Despite his warnings to be cautious, she laughed heartily, already pointing toward the woods to begin their search for ingredients. Hearing a sharp cry echo through the clearing, he simply sighed, having fully anticipated that her overconfidence would lead to immediate trouble. He quickly moved to steady the ghost after a tiny, electrified creature sent a jolt through her, leaving her paralyzed and twitching as he muttered about how much of a handful she was proving to be. Holding the small, spindly culprit by a thread, he peered down at the dazed spirit and dryly questioned if she had survived the encounter. Deciding they needed to be more organized, he directed the horned girl to accompany him into the deeper woods to harvest magic stones for their wands, a task she accepted with an enthusiastic shout. He then turned his attention to the others, tasking the elf with her original goal of alchemy and the cleric with foraging for edible plants near their camp. While the ghost hung her head in shame, the healer acknowledged the plan with a crisp nod. As they trekked through the dense foliage, he observed that the presence of the massive behemoth nearby seemed to have scared off most of the smaller threats, leading him to wonder if they should prioritize gathering common stones in bulk. The sun eventually dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the silent forest as the group settled in for the night. A thick bundle of arachne silk lay on the forest floor, its shimmering threads tightly wound and ready for transport. Picking up the valuable material, the spectral woman noted its exceptional quality for trading, while the young girl beside her marveled at the sheer volume they had managed to collect. Nearby, the cleric held a finished healing potion, instructing the others to leave any medicinal herbs with her so she could verify their potency before they were put to use. As the group consolidated their resources, the young leader reminded everyone of the settlement's strict rules, emphasizing that while they were welcome to stay, continued residency depended entirely on their ability to pay rent. With the day's work organized, he and the cleric prepared to depart for a nearby training facility, leaving the others behind with a final wish for a safe journey from their companions. Walking away, his mind turned toward the logistical challenges of their growing community, realizing that the increasing population would soon require a greater influx of flour, vegetables, and construction tools. The wooden fortifications of the outpost stood silent against the sky, a testament to the progress they had made in carving a home out of the wilderness. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by distant shouting, causing the young man to stop in his tracks as a heavy sense of foreboding washed over him. He follows the sound of the screams to find a chaotic scene where soldiers are roughly handling several individuals in an open yard. Observing the commotion, he wonders if this is some form of combat training, though he is unsettled to see that the opponents appear to be a woman and a child. As the shouting continues, the captain of the guards approaches and greets him. When asked about the disturbance, the captain dismissively explains that they're simply in the process of subduing some unruly slaves. He asks if the captain is there to discuss the war, but the soldier clarifies that a recent disaster in the demon land has wiped out their food supplies. Seizing the opportunity, he proposes a trade, which the captain readily accepts. Inside the facility, they negotiate the terms of their agreement. The captain is visibly impressed by the rare Arachne silk offered, agreeing to trade it for essential construction tools like saws, hammers, and needles. Despite the successful trade, the captain's expression turns serious as he mentions there is something specific he needs to hear regarding the demon land. He listens intently, sensing the sudden weight of the captain's upcoming words. The captain brings up a past civil war in East Kenya and mentions a noblewoman warrior who once came to purchase wands from the demon land, prompting a flicker of recognition from him. He listens as the history of the region is laid bare, a map illustrating the complex borders between the Kingdom of Estonia and the neighboring elf country. He watches as the captain points out that the elves took advantage of a civil war between nobles and adventurers to intervene in East Kenya. His words leave the youth stunned, as he never imagined an elven invasion of such scale, while a memory of Heli's desire to end the conflict flickers in his mind. He listens intently as the soldier continues his explanation, noting that while the elves were eventually repelled, the demographic of the region had already shifted irrevocably. His narrative details how many nobles were stripped of their status during the conflict, while the adventurers who fought on the front lines earned significant military prestige. He further explains that in such a combative land, public opinion is easily swayed by those who possess the most strength, a concept that the young man finds difficult to believe. He is then asked by the youth if the adventurers are now the ones in control, but clarifies that the nobles who originally manipulated the adventurers are the ones truly pulling the strings. He concludes with a grim warning. These same power-hungry nobles are now claiming the demon land as their own and likely seek to seize the power of the wands for themselves. He watches as the young man produces a crumpled document, claiming to have purchased territory within the demon lands to establish his own domain. He jolts in surprise as the captain points out that while the paper was issued by a real estate agent, it lacks the official signature of the Estonian royal family, rendering it legally toothless in a court of law. Stunned by the news, he can only stammer in disbelief, sweat beading on his forehead as the weight of his precarious legal position sinks in. He listens as the veteran soldier continues, explaining that the demon land has long existed as a lawless gray area, a situation that neighboring nations have exploited for their own gain, though he admits it would be preferable for the land to remain under the youth's control. He confirms the youth's suspicion with a measured nod, admitting that, in a way, the army is indeed on his side in this matter. He elaborates on the army's position, noting that while they serve the crown, they have the authority to intervene if the local forces in East Kenya attempt to defy the royal family's interests by acting against the youth. He leaves the youth with a final, chilling warning. Powerful interests are actively targeting his territory, a fact that makes the young man realize the military is grappling with its own internal power struggles and conflicting agendas. Despite the looming threat, a confident smile returns to his face as he asks for permission to simply drive off any intruders, signaling his readiness to defend what is his regardless of the legal technicalities. The captain's expression hardens as he considers the bureaucratic hurdles ahead. He acknowledges that the situation could become quite messy, but offers a solution. He will reach out to the central office to secure the official documentation necessary to prove the young man's ownership of the land. He leads the group through the fortified perimeter, his hand resting near his sword as they pass a grim scene. To the side, several sentries have pinned a struggling man to the dirt, a stark reminder of the local tensions. Behind the captain, the young settler, the horned girl, and the cleric follow closely, their eyes scanning the surroundings as they enter the heart of the military encampment. The soldier addresses Makio, offering a bound woman as a token of gratitude for their ongoing trade. He suggests that the young settler take this slave with him back to the demon land, presenting her as a gift from his company. He continues, explaining that she was sent by the new lord of East Kenya. With a callous shrug, he tells the youth that he can treat her however he likes, as she is now his property. The soldier's words cause the young settler to express his reservations, noting the complications of bringing a woman into their facility. He questions if her noble background might cause trouble, but the captain insists that her status is gone. She is merely a slave now, and as long as she remains in the demon territory, there will be no issues. He leans in, studying the woman's face as she avoids his gaze, her brow damp with nervous sweat and her eyes downcast in shame. He is met with a look of pure shock as her eyes suddenly widen in a moment of sharp, silent recognition. She is startled when the youth points a finger at her, the realization hitting him as well. Despite this slight change in her hairstyle, he remembers her as the customer who once came to purchase wands, and she can only stammer his name in disbelief. The youth's realization is interrupted as the cleric joins them, her face partially hidden by a dark hood. She emphasizes their desperate need for assistance, given the ruined state of the demon territory, while the captive woman stares, realizing the true identity of the person beneath the cloak. She looks on as he decides to accept the offer, hoisting the woman up and beginning to lead her away. He calls out a quick farewell to the soldiers, leaving them behind as he heads back toward his domain with his new companion. He bids farewell to the soldiers, carrying the bound woman on his back as he begins the trek home. Upon reaching the familiar dark opening of the cave, he is met by Cher and Helly, who offer a warm welcome home. He explains his unexpected companion, simply stating he has brought back a slave, which immediately draws a sharp, questioning look from the ethereal elf. The woman on his back slowly stirs, her heavy eyelids lifting as she begins to take in her new surroundings. Her gaze meets the translucent features of the elf, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock washes over her face. Stunned into a momentary silence, she can barely whisper the word elf as the reality of her situation sets in. Suddenly, that shock curdles into a violent, blinding rage. She screams a curse at the elven race, blaming them for her misfortunes as she lunges forward. Before anyone can react, she throws herself off his back and tackles the unsuspecting spirit to the ground, her hands reaching out in a desperate, vengeful assault. She is suddenly halted in her tracks as Makio lunges between them, his hands acting as a physical barrier. He pins the spectral elf to the ground while firmly pushing the former noblewoman back by her face, sternly commanding them to find a way to coexist as fellow servants of his household. Despite his intervention, the air remains thick with animosity as the two women lock eyes in a silent, venomous exchange. The elf glares up from the dirt with cold defiance, while the newcomer's expression is a mixture of shock and lingering rage, her face still reeling from the young man's forceful rebuff. He eventually releases them, though the constant bickering and high-pitched shouting quickly take their toll on his patience. Covering his ears against the cacophony, he groans about how noisy his cave has become, while the two women continue to hover nearby, their mutual dislike far from resolved. Taking a moment to assert his authority, the young man looks the former noblewoman directly in the eye to establish the new order of things. He explains that she will be living there now, but his hospitality comes with strict conditions. Any further fighting or a failure to contribute or share the rent will result in her immediate eviction. With the rules established, the group gathers to plan their next move, though the tension between the elf and the slave remains palpable as they continue to growl at one another in the background. Cher offers a simple word of agreement as Makio decides their first priority is to construct a proper house for her, seeking to bring some semblance of structure to their chaotic living situation. The following morning brings a fresh start as he emerges from the cave into the crisp air of the forest. Yawning and stretching, he greets the new day with a sense of purpose, his gaze drifting toward the dense woods where their work awaits. Inside, a surprising scene unfolds as the two rivals find common ground in their shared dissatisfaction with the morning meal. They stand united, demanding that Jennifer increase the spice in the vegetable seasoning, much to the cleric's confusion. Watching them, the young man can't help but feel that, in their own strange way, they are finally starting to get along. Ready to begin the day's labor, he adjusts his pack and outlines the agenda for the group. He announces that today's hunt will focus on gathering both food and essential materials, setting a determined tone for the tasks ahead. He and the others let out a collective shout of determination, their fists raised high as they prepare to face the dangers of the forest. As the hunt begins, the young man watches closely, noting that Sylvia seems more than capable of handling herself in a fight against the hulking ogre that towers over her. However, the tide turns in an instant when a massive, long-necked turtle lunges from the brush, its jaws snapping shut around the terrified woman as she screams in horror, certain she is about to be devoured. Reacting quickly to the sudden threat, he calls out to Cher, his attention momentarily diverted by a strange, crackling creature nearby as they move to intervene. With a decisive strike, the beast's long neck is severed, sending a spray of dark blood over everything nearby and leaving the former noblewoman drenched and trembling as the creature's head hits the ground with a heavy thud. Surveying the messy aftermath, he instructs Cher to take the blood-soaked Sylvia to the river to clean up, while the shell-shocked woman can do little more than offer a faint apology for her state. Even the spectral Helly notes that she hasn't escaped the carnage unscathed, mentioning that she too has been splattered with blood and intends to join the others at the water's edge. The group makes their way toward the tranquil flow of the river, the sound of rushing water promising a brief respite from the violence of the hunt. The young man savors a hearty meal, finding the flavor truly delicious as the pot of turtle soup simmers steadily over the crackling campfire. He is suddenly interrupted by Cher, who urgently beckons him away from the warmth of the fire and into the shadows of the surrounding woods. Following her lead, they stumble upon a gruesome discovery: the bloodied carcass of a horse lying motionless on the forest floor. He examines the remains, noting the presence of a saddle and realizing that someone must have been riding the beast, while Cher points out even more carcasses scattered nearby. Investigating the area further, they find a discarded bag containing a letter, along with a blood-stained sword left abandoned in the dirt. The young man's expression grows grim as he contemplates the evidence, wondering if an intruder has breached their territory and what their intentions might have been. High above the site of the slaughter, a massive Vespa hornet nest hangs ominously from the rocky overhang, revealing the likely source of the violence. He concludes that the riders are beyond saving, and Heli, appearing at his side, pragmatically suggests they return to their meal before the situation escalates further. He watches as the ethereal woman absorbs the information, her expression unreadable as she simply acknowledges the situation. She remains the subject of his intense scrutiny as he catches a detail that had previously gone unremarked upon. He finally speaks up, noting the intricate, dark patterns that wind across her translucent skin, questioning the nature of the tattoos covering her arms. He listens intently as she explains that these markings are far from decorative. They are a seal designed to contain a curse dwelling within her, a burden that severely restricts her ability to channel magic. Looking away, she confesses the full truth. The curse is so absolute that she is currently unable to cast any magic whatsoever. She watches as he processes this revelation with surprising calm, asking only if this limitation interferes with her daily existence, before reassuring her that as her landlord, her identity matters less than her continued ability to produce valuable potions. He dismisses the notion entirely when she asks if the curse frightens him, prompting the young former noble to reveal, with a slight tremor in her voice, that she, too, suffers from a magical deficiency rooted in a curse from the Demon King's lineage. She elaborates on her own plight, explaining that her magic is restricted to a few specific spells, one to dull physical pain and another that briefly pushes her body beyond its natural limits. As the group continues their journey through the woods, she and her companions continue their journey, their spirits lifted by their shared secrets. Nearby, the young man watches them with a gentle smile, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination that contrasts with their newfound ease. As their laughter drifts toward him, he looks down at the crisp parchment in his hands, remarking on how carefree they truly are. His expression hardens as he suddenly clenches his fist, violently crumpling the document into a tight, unrecognizable ball. With the decision made, he tosses the wad of paper aside and turns his back on it, walking away to rejoin the others as they move further into the wilderness. The discarded message settles against a stone, partially unfurling to reveal the harsh reality he is choosing to ignore, a formal order demanding his immediate departure from the territory. The ethereal woman leaned over the sleeping youth, her voice a soft but persistent command for him to wake up. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open as he slowly returned to consciousness, unaware of the spectral presence hovering just inches away. Bolting upright in his bed, the young man let out a cry of shock, clutching his chest as he realized she was right there in his private quarters. As the initial fright subsided, they began to discuss the practicalities of their work. He pondered the use of clay for medicine jars, but she countered with a suggestion to use sap from the yasi tree, a technique she had learned from Cher. She turned away, her gaze drifting as she contemplated other possibilities, deciding that she would experiment with various materials to find the best solution. Suddenly, she recalled a more pressing matter, mentioning that she and Cher had witnessed something peculiar at the Western Creek, much to his bewilderment that she had entered his room so early just to deliver such news. With a look of grim seriousness, the spirit revealed the nature of the anomaly. They had discovered a zombie lurking in the area. Deep within the dense, shadowed woods near the water's edge, the unsettling silence hinted at the hidden danger she had described. Arriving at the Western Creek, the group halts as the horned girl points out the creature they found lurking in the brush. It is a wretched sight, a decaying, skinless humanoid dragging itself forward with its remaining limbs, letting out a guttural, mindless moan. Looking down at the half-formed monster, the cleric suggests they should burn and bury it just to be safe, even if it seems harmless. The young settler notes, with a grimace, that the creature is still moving despite only having its upper body intact. The horned girl then reveals a startling truth. She had already defeated this very zombie once before in the Demon Lands, yet it seems the creature could not be truly destroyed. In response to her revelation, he instructs her to incinerate the remains with magic to prevent any potential virus from spreading. He then reminds her of the gold coin he had previously given her, explaining that he had scavenged it from this very creature long ago. He continues his explanation, revealing that the coin found on the zombie was the specific item that eventually led him to find the cleric. She listens in stunned silence, her expression shifting from confusion to a growing sense of dread. The revelation hits her hard, and she demands he repeat himself, clearly disturbed by the dark connection between her rescue and this undead horror. As the flames consume the remains, he observes that the corpse is too far gone to identify, though the absence of ears leads him to wonder if it might have once been an elf adventurer. He gazes out over the desolate expanse of the demon land, pondering the possibility that a predecessor had once ventured into these forbidden reaches. Beside him, a simple glass vial sits, perhaps a remnant of that lost expedition. The ethereal woman studies the gold coin intently, her brow furrowed in deep thought as she examines the ancient markings. She observes that the coin is undeniably authentic, prompting the young man to ask if Midgard was indeed the name of a city and if the zombie they encountered had somehow found its way there. The spirit then recounts the legend of Midgard, the capital of the magical kingdom of Yggdrasil, a place where magic was woven into the fabric of daily life and technological advancement surpassed all other nations. While she notes that records of the city vanished long ago, the former noblewoman interjects with surprise, recalling a history book that mentioned a lost country within these very demon lands. This book, a weathered notebook belonging to a traveler named PJ, contains startling accounts of civilization where people vanished without a trace and floating islands were consumed by monstrous beasts. Holding the journal, the youth urges the others to focus on the final entry, sensing that the most critical revelation lies on the very last page. He reflects on the skeleton he found in the cave, noting that the man was already reduced to bones. The notebook found on the corpse contained a final, haunting regret: the inability to solve the mystery of the demon land. He recalls finding Peter Jefferson's grave on a floating island in the sky alongside Cher, which makes the presence of the notebook in the cave a confusing contradiction. Hearing this, the spectral elf questions the logic, pointing out that if PJ died on the floating island, it makes no sense for his notebook to be in the possession of someone else in a distant cave. She watches as he directs their attention to the final pages, specifically the handwriting accompanying a complex magic circle, suggesting there is more to the text than meets the eye. He asks if she notices the shift in the quality of the handwriting on that last page, prompting her to lean in for a closer look. Her eyes widen with a sudden realization. The notebook wasn't the work of a single man, but was written by two distinct authors. She sees him nod in agreement while taking a bite of an apple, concluding that despite their efforts, neither of the two previous owners managed to uncover the truth of the demon land. He listens as she synthesizes these clues with her own knowledge of elven history, concluding that the magical kingdom of Yggdrasil must have been located within the demon land. She speculates that the ancient kingdom of Yggdrasil might have been at odds with the demons who arrived from across the sea, suggesting a history of conflict that predates their current understanding. Continuing her train of thought, she ponders the deeper mysteries that still haunt the land. Why such a powerful kingdom vanished without a trace, and where the legendary realm of Midgard might be hidden. Turning her gaze toward the young man, she admits that her spirit is bound to this realm. She cannot find peace or leave until the secrets of the demon land are finally laid bare and the truth is revealed. Inspired by her words, the cleric excitedly suggests that her family's ancient history book might be the key, wondering if it is her destiny to solve the enigma that has persisted for generations. While she dreams of destiny, the landlord remains grounded in his role, sternly reminding everyone that even if ruins are found, he is still in charge and will not tolerate anyone hoarding treasure for themselves. As he asserts his authority, the mystery of the land remains a silent backdrop to their lives. Yet the sun continues to rise over the vast landscape as the group settles back into the rhythm of their daily existence. As life continues in this mysterious place, the spectral woman and the horned girl work side by side, carefully following a set of plans to construct a sturdy kiln for the growing settlement. While they work on the kiln, the cleric contributes to the community's efforts by cleaning their supplies and skillfully weaving baskets, finding purpose in the simple, necessary tasks of survival. She observed as the group's newest addition, Sylvia, began to contemplate her role in their small community while working diligently in the background. The former slave approached the young man, her voice hesitant as she inquired if it might be possible to forge weapons and armor using the materials harvested from the monsters they had defeated. He was caught off guard by the proposal, his eyes widening as he asked if she truly possessed such a specialized skill. She looked away shyly, explaining that while she hadn't attempted it yet, she felt a strong desire to try. Encouraged by her initiative, the youth gave his enthusiastic approval, pointing out that they had an abundance of materials and suggesting that her work could serve as her contribution to their shared expenses. Sometime later, she appeared before him completely transformed, outfitted in sturdy gear and gripping a massive hammer that signaled her new vocation. He was genuinely impressed, noting how well the equipment suited her. Now recognized as the armorer of this treacherous land, she didn't stop there. She looked him in the eye and earnestly asked him to teach her how to fight. In response to her request, the young settler admitted that he didn't feel qualified to be a combat instructor, but he offered to teach her the survival skills necessary to endure the demon land instead. Seeing his willingness to help, she accepted without a moment's hesitation, bowing low and declaring that any knowledge he could provide would be invaluable to her. She suddenly found herself face to face with a new terror as a massive bear let out a deafening roar, its jagged teeth bared in a display of raw aggression. The young woman leaps through the air, her massive hammer raised high, but the giant bear's thick hide proves impenetrable. She grunts as her strike fails to leave a mark, realizing her current approach is futile against such a beast. Watching from a safe distance, the young man crosses his arms, his expression thoughtful as he critiques her performance. He suggests that she needs to be more observant of her opponent's weak points, noting to himself that while her fundamentals are decent, she lacks tactical depth. He continues his lecture, explaining that when an initial attack fails, a warrior must immediately pivot to a new strategy rather than stubbornly persisting. He emphasizes that improving one's tactics and powers of observation is the key to overcoming seemingly insurmountable foes, just as he once did. Struck by his insight, she looks at him with wide, curious eyes and asks where he could have possibly learned such advanced combat philosophy. He responds calmly, admitting that while he took basic courses at the Adventurers Guild, the majority of his survival skills were forged in the unforgiving environment of the Demon Land. She is visibly taken aback by this revelation, stammering that his combat prowess seems far beyond what simple observation could provide. He simply reiterates his point, explaining that by truly watching a target, one can begin to predict its every move. To illustrate his point, he holds up a piece of bone, explaining that the very act of dismantling prey provides invaluable knowledge of anatomy. He demonstrates how bones are designed to bend inward but not outward, a detail that dictates an enemy's effective attack range. She remains silent, absorbing the weight of his words as he concludes his lesson. He encourages her, suggesting that finding her own unique style through constant observation is the most effective path forward. She listens as the young man explains a vital survival rule. When encountering unfamiliar fruit in the Demon Land, one must first test for poison by applying it to the skin to see if it causes a reaction. He watches in shock as Jennifer reacts violently to a fruit she likely ate, her mouth erupting in a gout of flame from the intense heat. She is scolded for her recklessness, while Sylvia watches the chaos, sweating as she realizes the absolute necessity of observation in this harsh environment, where even a snack can be deadly. She and the others find that life in the Demon Land continues as a constant struggle against the unknown amidst the dense forests and towering mountains. One day during lunch, a piercing scream shatters the peace, catching him off guard just as he was about to take a bite. He immediately springs into action as the sound echoes from the West River, calling for Cher to follow while ordering the others to stay safe in the cave to avoid any potential danger. He and Jennifer race toward the source of the cry, only to stumble upon a grim sight, several figures lying motionless on the ground. They look on in horror as she confirms the worst, noting that the fallen travelers are no longer breathing. They are all dead, their journey cut short by an unknown threat. He leans over the lifeless body, noting the strange circumstances of the death. It appears the travelers didn't fall to blades, but perhaps to the suffocating embrace of slimes or the river itself. As he continues his grim inspection, he discovers a peculiar mark on the skin of another victim. Jennifer points out that every one of them bears the same symbol, a crescent moon paired with a cross. This discovery leaves her deeply unsettled, questioning if the Demon Land is facing some sort of invasion. He agrees that they can't get answers from the dead and suggests they search for any survivors who might explain what happened. The dense forest remains silent, offering no immediate answers to the mystery of the fallen travelers. Moving further along the bank, they stumble upon yet another corpse, this time a masked woman. She, too, bears the telltale mark on her shoulder, confirming a connection between all the deceased. He ponders the danger of leaving the bodies, fearing they might rise as zombies and cause further trouble. Jennifer suggests that they should bring the captain to see this, hoping his experience might shed light on the situation. Before taking that step, he decides it's best to consult with the rest of their group to see if anyone recognizes the mysterious markings. Upon showing the mark to their companions, Sylvia's eyes widen in immediate recognition. The symbol is clearly familiar to her, though the implications remain to be seen. She reveals the name of the group associated with the mark, the 16 of Hazes, a notorious assassination squad serving the church. The revelation leaves the others stunned and questioning the presence of such a group in this territory. The young man is baffled by the name, while the cleric beside him wonders if such a legendary and terrifying group could truly be real, or if they are merely a myth used to instill fear. Recalling a dark memory from her past, the former noble explains that she first heard the name when her father was under threat. She recounts the grim warning associated with them. The moment that crescent moon and cross appear, one must abandon everything and run for their life. This grim realization weighs heavily on the youth, who begins to panic at the thought of 16 elite killers hunting them. He looks around the woods, wondering if they are already being watched and how many more might be on their way. As he tries to process the threat, the spectral elf poses a vital question. Why would church assassins be operating within the dangerous borders of the demon land, and what could their objective be? He looks at his companions and realizes they are a magnet for trouble, consisting of a fallen noble, a cast-off priestess, a fugitive elf, and even a demon. It is no wonder they have attracted such dangerous attention from the Church's shadows. Knowing they are outmatched, the young man firmly states that this is a matter for the military. He insists that they are in no position to handle a threat of this magnitude on their own and must seek professional help. He decides to take action, announcing that he will head to the captain's post alone to report the situation while the others remain safely hidden in the dense forest. He arrived at the fortified gates of the Estonian military outpost, a stark wooden structure standing guard over the frontier, seeking the authorities to report his grim discovery. Inside, the commander's eyes widened in disbelief as the name of the dreaded group, the 16 of Hazes, was spoken aloud. He stroked his beard thoughtfully, admitting that the situation had become quite complicated, especially since the bodies found preserved in sap were already dead and bore the telltale crescent moon and cross tattoos of the Church's elite assassins. He listened as the young man expressed his primary concern, not the identity of the dead, but the fear that their comrades would come seeking revenge if they found the bodies within the demon land. The officer agreed to take custody of the remains and contact central authorities for more intelligence. They both considered the implications, with the youth wondering if dark rumors about the demon land were already drawing such dangerous people to the region. He grew even more solemn, leaning forward to ask for a moment of the young man's time to discuss a separate, equally pressing matter. He watched the youth's expression turn expectant as the air grew heavy with the weight of the upcoming revelation. He listened intently as the commander brought up the issue of the demon land's ownership, a topic the officer had mentioned before, which prompted a sharp, concerned inquiry about what exactly had transpired. He listens as the commander explains the legal transition. The demon land is officially becoming his territory, with a formal certificate expected to arrive in just 3 days. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the young man beams, offering a heartfelt thanks for the news that secures his future. The officer offers a warm, congratulatory smile, noting that this acquisition effectively elevates the youth to the status of a noble. This revelation leaves him utterly stunned, his mind racing as he tries to process the sudden weight of such a title. Seeing the confusion, the commander shifts to a more serious tone, explaining that the sheer scale of the land necessitates such a position and the responsibilities that come with it. However, a dark shadow falls over the conversation as he warns of an imminent threat. Private forces and adventurers from East Kenya are likely to launch an invasion within those same 3 days. The news strikes like a physical blow, leaving the young landlord gasping in disbelief as he demands to know why such a thing would happen. The commander clarifies the grim reality that until the paperwork is finalized, the military is legally barred from intervening, making this brief window of time the perfect opportunity for an opportunistic strike. He continues his explanation, noting that for the next 3 days, until the official documents arrive, the defense of the territory rests solely on the young man's shoulders. He frames this trial as a preliminary test of nobility, urging the youth to hold out and protect the demon land by any means necessary. Stunned by the weight of the responsibility, the youth can only manage to ask about the size of the force they will be facing. The officer provides a grim estimate, suggesting that East Kenya will likely deploy between 1,000 and 2,000 troops. This revelation strikes the young man like a physical blow, his voice cracking as he declares the situation utterly impossible. Beads of sweat form on his brow as he counts their meager numbers, reminding the commander that there are only 5 people in total. The sheer absurdity of 5 individuals standing against thousands leaves him desperate for a solution that doesn't seem to exist. With a somber expression, the commander emphasizes the gravity of the situation, explaining that allowing East Kenya to expand their influence here could ignite a catastrophic war with the Elven Kingdom. The prevention of such a conflict is the true priority, regardless of the odds. A quiet resolve begins to flicker in the young man's eyes as he considers his motivations. While the title of nobility holds no allure for him, the thought of losing the home he has built is unbearable. Looking out over the vast, rugged expanse of the demon land, he realizes that this territory is more than just property. It is a place he is unwilling to abandon to invaders. He takes a steadying breath, his voice low but firm as he finally accepts the impossible task laid before him. His gaze hardens with newfound determination, and he vows to do his absolute best to defend his land, no matter the cost. The young man raises a finger, his expression serious as he lays out the dire reality. An invasion from East Kenya is imminent, and they cannot simply stand by. He continues his briefing to the small group, emphasizing that 5 people facing an army of 2,000 in a direct confrontation is suicide. Instead, they must rely on the terrain and a series of carefully placed traps. While he explains the strategy, the former noblewoman mutters anxiously about this being an unparalleled chance for revenge, while the cleric beside her is unexpectedly enthusiastic, her eyes bright with determination as she accepts the plan. She remains silent as the cleric questions the logic of the enemy leaving their own lands to fight in such a desolate, cursed location. A sentiment the elven spirit echoes with a weary sigh, clearly finding the whole ordeal a massive inconvenience. She and the others listen as the youth urges everyone to move quickly and begin preparing the pit traps within the dense forest. He and the cleric set to work immediately, their shovels biting into the earth as they labor to excavate the first of many defenses. He is interrupted when the horned girl chimes in, excitedly suggesting he uses magic to create the holes instantly, but he quickly shuts down the idea, firm in his decision to stick to manual labor for the task. He sighs, relenting to the girl's persistent questioning about why he won't use the earth-shaking power she calls Zoa. With a resigned look, he prepares to demonstrate his own method, signaling that he will give it a try. Suddenly, the ground erupts with a deafening roar, a massive pillar of earth surging upward as if the land itself were being reshaped by an invisible hand. The others can only watch in stunned silence as the landscape is transformed in an instant. In the wake of the upheaval, the former noblewoman observes that while the display resembles earth magic, it feels fundamentally different. Beside her, the spectral elf is left breathless, unable to comprehend a form of power she has never encountered in all her years. The young man calmly explains that his feat isn't actually magic in the traditional sense. He simply identifies the natural rising forces within the earth and uses a small amount of energy to manipulate them. To him, this complex interference with nature's flow is a simple, effortless task. This explanation only deepens the horned girl's confusion as she struggles to understand the distinction. In her mind, the ability to perceive and direct such energy is the very definition of casting a spell. Seeing their bewildered expressions, he is genuinely surprised, wondering why they find his methods so unusual. The entire group remains frozen, their faces etched with a mix of disbelief and awe at the casual display of power. The realization begins to dawn on the young girl that he is manifesting power through pure imagination, bypassing the rigid structures of known sorcery. While he remains puzzled, believing magic is something one must painstakingly practice and test, the spectral elf realizes she is witnessing the birth of an entirely new magical paradigm. The young man admits that the village elders had once deemed him completely devoid of magical talent, a claim he still believes to be true. The cleric counters this, explaining that the standard path involves learning chants to test one's aptitude, a fundamental step he seems to have bypassed entirely. He watches as the realization finally dawns on her, her eyes wide with shock as she concludes that his ability to manifest magic without a single spoken word is truly extraordinary. She and the others immediately recoil in unison, pointing accusing fingers at him, while collectively labeling him a complete freak of nature for defying the established laws of sorcery. They eventually settle down enough for the spectral elf to shift the conversation toward strategy, questioning if his power could be used to reshape the land into a complex maze. Though he is skeptical of the idea's effectiveness, she insists they must find a way to turn his unique talent into a tactical advantage. She is joined by the horned girl, who elaborates on the plan by explaining that even subtle changes to the terrain, like a series of small hills, can drastically alter the flow of a battle if deployed in sufficient numbers. She envisions a path winding through artificial valleys, where they could funnel their enemies into narrow corridors and spring lethal traps from the shadows. This strategy becomes clearer as they sit atop one of the newly formed ridges, where she points out that simply controlling the high ground provides them with a natural defensive edge that any invading force would struggle to overcome. They discuss the possibilities further, and he admits that the plan has merit, especially since his primary goal is to avoid the risks of direct, face-to-face combat whenever possible. He listens as the quiet girl with the short hair chimes in with a more ruthless suggestion. They could use blood and fresh meat to lure wild monsters into the area, forcing their enemies to fight the local beasts before they even reach the settlement. She suggests that magic circles would be a potent addition to their defenses. Makio immediately agrees, noting that he has already experimented with numerous circles found in PJ's old notebook, and asks for further ideas. He has a sudden realization, seeing the potential for even greater destruction. If they were to place explosive magic circles atop the very hills they are constructing, the impact would be far more effective. As the strategy evolves, Jennifer points out that if the enemy forces camp in a large group, their primary goal should be to disrupt their supply lines. Makio follows this logic, questioning if poisoning their food would be the best course of action. This suggestion catches the elf's attention. Makio explains that there are swamp flowers already buried in the ground nearby, which should be ripe enough to be harvested for potent potions. She then proposes a practical solution for delivery, crafting simple pots from palm sap. These containers would melt quickly when exposed to fire, making them perfect, disposable tools for their plan. Makio is impressed, agreeing that this should suffice for their current needs. He looks on with a newfound sense of determination. For the first time, the weight of the coming conflict feels manageable, and he truly believes that by utilizing every resource at their disposal, they have a genuine chance at victory. With the plan finalized, his voice rings out through the dense forest. He commands everyone to begin their preparations immediately, the urgency of the task ahead clear in his tone. The group stands united, each member focused on their specific role in the coming struggle. This marks the beginning of what will be known as the greatest operation ever conducted within the treacherous borders of the Demon Land. He exhales a sigh of relief, announcing that the final preparations are finally complete, a sentiment echoed by the group's collective resolve. Because the work is finished, he suggests they take a moment to eat and regain their strength. But the brief peace is shattered when the elf's ears twitch at a rhythmic thumping that begins to vibrate through the air. From deep within the dense treeline, the ominous, steady beat of war drums begins to echo, signaling the arrival of the long-awaited force. In response to the sound, the young woman beside him trembles, her voice shaking as she asks if the enemy has already arrived, while he notes that although the troops remain hidden, their motivation for the coming battle is palpable. He immediately takes command, ordering everyone to evacuate to the hilltop, while sternly cautioning them to avoid the hidden magic circles, even as the cleric questions how such a massive army will manage to fill the valley below. Moments later, the group reaches the summit, standing together in silence as they gaze out over the vast landscape that is about to become a battlefield. An hour passes in agonizing stillness, the anticipation hanging heavy in the air as they watch the horizon for the first sign of movement. Finally, the wait comes to an end as the enemy forces emerge from the distance, beginning their inevitable advance toward the hill. He grew increasingly agitated as the expected enemy forces failed to appear, his hands gesturing wildly in frustration. Beside him, the spectral woman listened intently, noting that the faint echoes of combat and screams drifting from across the stream suggested the invaders were currently occupied fighting the forest monsters. Following her observation, the young woman in the tattered tunic stammered that moving such a large number of people through the dense woods would be a logistical nightmare. The spirit agreed, adding grimly that many of the soldiers might perish before they even set foot on the demon land. The spirit's grim prediction was noted by the young man, who watched as the cleric suggested they use the downtime to bake bread back in the cave. The horned girl quickly agreed, eager for a productive distraction while they waited for the inevitable. They waited until the sun eventually dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet hills. With nothing having happened, the group finally decided to abandon their watch and return to the safety of the cave. Sheltered within the stone walls later that evening, they listened as the former noble spoke of the fall of East Kenya, explaining that the invasion succeeded because of multiple traitors within the castle who had been bribed with gold. Her words caused the spectral elf to pause, her expression turning pensive as she wondered aloud if there might be traitors hidden among their own small group as well. The spirit's concern was dismissed by the young woman with a smile, as she insisted that such a thing was impossible among their companions while they sat together, sharing a meal. Suddenly, he looked up with a start, his eyes widening as a new thought, or perhaps a distant sound, caught his attention, breaking the brief moment of peace. He breaks the silence with a casual revelation that leaves the others stunned. With a calm expression, he mentions that he had forgotten to share a significant detail. Once the current conflict concludes, there is a possibility he will be elevated to the rank of nobility. The announcement catches his companions completely off guard, their faces reflecting a mixture of disbelief and shock as they process the weight of his words. Makio ponders Helgen's past, asking if she was once a noble. Helgen and Sylvia are dismissive, warning against associating with the untrustworthy, while Cher pouts in disappointment at the turn the conversation has taken. Seeking clarity, he asks for a show of hands to see who among them has held such a title. To his utter disbelief, Sylvia, Helgen, and even Cher raise their hands in silent confirmation. He is stunned by the revelation that nearly his entire party consists of former nobility, finding it hard to believe that even the energetic Cher shares such a prestigious background. Turning to Jennifer for a more grounded perspective, he asks what being a noble truly entails in this world. She, however, is preoccupied, aggressively devouring her meal with a look of intense, almost desperate concentration. The others chime in with their varied interpretations of noble duty. Sylvia speaks of self-sacrifice for the nation. Cher mentions the expectation of producing many heirs, and Helgen focuses on the administrative burden of managing a territory. Unimpressed by these lofty or peculiar answers, he sighs and requests they stick to the practical, everyday realities of the role. They elaborate further, with Sylvia noting the rigors of military training and tactics, Cher adding the need for knightly efforts, and Helgen detailing the complexities of infrastructure and trade relations. As night falls over the quiet landscape, he realizes that their conflicting and intense views have left him more confused than before, deciding that he will have to look into the matter on his own. He and the others managed to rest as night fell, rotating guard duties to ensure everyone got some sleep. Sylvia took her turn by the fire, watching the dark perimeter, but the expected enemy invasion never materialized. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the camp remained undisturbed. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion shattered the morning silence, jolting the young man awake. As he scrambled to his feet, he looked toward the nearby hill and questioned if one of the magic circles they had set had been triggered. Sylvia, already alert, confirmed his suspicion with a grim nod. Without wasting a moment, they both raced toward the crest of the hill. A thick plume of dark smoke billowed into the sky, marking the exact location where the trap had been sprung. Upon reaching the site, they found the charred remains of a massive wild boar. The creature had been caught directly in the blast, its life extinguished instantly by the defensive magic. The young settler surveyed the scene, noting that while the trap worked, it had claimed an unintended target. He explained to Sylvia that they couldn't leave the carcass there, as the scent of blood would attract other monsters that might damage their remaining traps. They would have to dispose of the remains elsewhere. As he and Sylvia discussed their next move, Cher appeared silently behind them, startled by her sudden presence. He turned and asked exactly when she had arrived, surprised that she had approached without being noticed. The horned girl didn't answer his question, her gaze fixed intently on the horizon. With a chilling certainty, she whispered that they had finally arrived. Pointing across the stream toward the distant borders of the demon land, she signaled the approach of the true threat. He followed her gesture, his expression hardening as he realized the long-awaited confrontation was finally at hand. He watches from a distance as the Estonian soldiers march through the dense woods, their presence a clear sign of the impending invasion. Behind the front lines, a mysterious figure in a four-eyed mask watches the proceedings, their gaze fixed on the task at hand with cold calculation. The quiet of the forest is suddenly broken by the heavy thud of an axe striking wood, signaling the start of their construction efforts. Because of the order, the soldiers begin felling trees in earnest, working quickly to clear the area and gather materials. Seeing this, Sylvia whispers that they are planning to build a bridge to cross the gap, a realization that Makio acknowledges with a grim look. He then turns to his allies, remarking that a warrior cannot fight on an empty stomach, much to the surprise of those around him. While Cher asks for their next move, Jennifer approaches with a basket of smoked meat and nuts, encouraging the group to eat and regain their strength. In response to the worry that the smell might draw monsters, he explains that they can use the beasts as a distraction if needed, but for now, they must prepare for the meal. While the preparations for the meal begin elsewhere, the logs are finally in place across the river, providing the Estonian army with their path forward. He stands before his troops, his four-eyed mask glinting as he commands them to charge into battle, detailing their plan to split into teams once they reach the cover of the trees. Following his lead, the armored ranks surge across the makeshift bridge, their boots thudding against the rough timber as they breach the forest's edge. Suddenly, the ground itself seems to rise up as translucent, gelatinous masses erupt from the earth, catching the vanguard off guard. They scramble to maintain their formation, some lashing out at the wobbling slimes, while others attempt to push deeper into the woods. As they penetrate further into the dense foliage, they stumble upon a group of long-nosed beasts perched among the roots, their presence a silent, looming threat. Without warning, the creatures strike with savage force, their powerful limbs crushing armor and bone as the soldiers' screams echo through the canopy. From above, a swarm of winged demons descends to join the slaughter, tearing at the men from the air, even as their commander bellows for them to ignore the dying and press the advance. He watches as his troops funnel into the narrow gorge, unaware of the impending doom. The Estonian soldiers march in tight formation, their spears held high as they navigate the rocky terrain. Suddenly, the formation shatters as the first wave of monsters strikes from the shadows. Screams of agony fill the air while a gelatinous slime lunges at a fallen soldier, its core glowing with a predatory light. The slaughter intensifies as massive, long-nosed beasts tear through the ranks and imps descend from the sky like a dark cloud. Men are bitten and clawed, their cries for help lost in the cacophony of the ambush. Seeing the chaos, the commander raises his arms to halt the panicked retreat, his voice booming with authority. He declares that he will incinerate the encroaching monsters with his own magic, his four-eyed mask glinting in the light. High above the carnage, the young landlord and his ethereal companion watch the battle unfold from the safety of a ridge. She identifies the magician as the key to the invasion, suggesting that his death would bring an immediate end to the assault. She draws her bow with practiced grace, her expression cold and focused as she prepares the lethal shot. After receiving a nod of agreement from her companion, she pulls the string taut, the arrow aimed directly at the heart of the enemy leader. Unaware of the eyes upon him, the masked figure begins his incantation, his fingers tracing ancient symbols on a floating tablet. He is fully concentrated on his spell, believing himself to be the master of the battlefield. A single arrow streaks through the air, a silent messenger of death hurtling toward its target. He recoils as the arrow strikes, the impact jarring his four-eyed mask and drawing a spray of blood. His subordinates cry out in alarm, realizing their leader has been targeted by an unseen assailant from the heights. He survives the grazing blow, much to the frustration of the archer on the cliffs. She laments that her shot missed its mark, and though the young man tries to offer encouragement for the hit, she knows the opportunity for a clean kill has passed. She watches as the soldiers in the pass below scramble in confusion, searching the heights for the source of the attack. The sudden strike has thrown their ranks into chaos, leaving them vulnerable and leaderless for a fleeting moment. They are met with his frantic bellows as he demands protection, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and fury. He orders them to shield him with their very lives, showing no concern for their safety as long as he remains out of harm's way. He is quickly shielded by their heavy plates as the soldiers form a defensive wall, locking their shields together in response to his desperate commands. The steel barrier rises to ward off any subsequent volleys from the cliffs above. They are ordered to continue the advance without rest while he makes a cowardly retreat toward the safety of the river's far bank. His priority is his own survival, even as he commands his men to march forward into the thick of the battle. He is watched with disdain by the veteran officer from across the field, who scoffs at the sight of the enemy leader abandoning his post. The commander sees the retreat for what it is, a moment of weakness that signals a shift in the battle's momentum. He signals to the young man and his companions that it is finally their turn to act as the tide of battle shifts. With the enemy's leadership in disarray, the group prepares to move, ready to capitalize on the chaos and intervene in the conflict. He narrows his eyes, spotting a group of individuals in the distance who resemble seasoned adventurers. Beside him, the young woman tenses as she follows his gaze, her expression turning to one of recognition and dread. Looking out over the vast landscape from their vantage point, he is struck by the sight of the approaching force and asks his companion if she recognizes the figures. She stammers in response, her voice trembling with a sudden, sharp fear as she identifies the group. Sweat beads on her forehead as she stares intently, confirming with a shaky breath that there is no mistake. These are the very people who stood as enemies to her father, and their presence here bodes ill for everyone involved. Emerging from the tree line, the main force of the rebellion army makes their presence known. At their center stands a formidable warrior draped in furs, resting a massive blade upon his shoulder, flanked by a heavily armored knight and a determined archer. Chaos erupts as the soldiers are beset by monsters and hidden traps. Screams fill the air as the front line buckles under the unexpected assault. Because of this sudden onslaught, panic spreads through the ranks as the commander looks on, with men crying out that the path forward is impassable. They feel trapped between the monsters and the lethal mechanisms of the terrain. He watches the unfolding disaster with cold, unyielding eyes. There is no sympathy in his gaze, only a grim determination to see the mission through, regardless of the cost in lives. Suddenly, a dark liquid erupts from the chaos, drenching the armored men in a gruesome spray. While they reel from the impact, the archer and her leader look on as the soldiers realize they are covered in the blood of monsters, a terrifying omen of the slaughter surrounding them. Drawing his massive blade, he bellows a ruthless ultimatum. He will not permit a single man to retreat, and anyone attempting to cross back over the bridge will be cut down by his own hand. In response to the growing descent, the ground trembles as a heavy spiked mace slams into the earth, further disorienting the already terrified troops. They are quickly confronted by the armored knight, who stands firm and urges the others forward with a stern warning that this is no time for hesitation. While the young landlord watches the grim scene from the periphery, the young man watches intently, noticing a shift in the atmosphere as the soldiers' resolve begins to fracture under the weight of the unknown. Because of this mounting dread, the front lines descend into a nightmare of blood and screams, where man-eating flora and predatory beasts tear through the ranks with ease. He remains perched at a distance, pondering the senselessness of the slaughter while the rebellion's leader maintains a cold, detached vigil over the carnage, noting that the beasts are being lured by the scent of blood. The commander finally voices his brutal logic, declaring that the soldiers' lives are merely tools to trigger every trap and clear a safe route for the true infiltration. In response to this callous disregard, the terrified men scramble toward the supposed safety of a nearby hill, desperate to escape the monsters they cannot hope to defeat. Their hope is instantly shattered as the hilltop erupts in a series of violent explosions, scattering broken bodies and armor across the landscape. He watches the massacre without a hint of remorse, even as a massive bear looms over the survivors who manage to avoid the blasts. From their vantage point, The youth and his companions can only look on in silence as the horizon is choked by the smoke of the dying army. He watches from a distance as the hillside erupts in a series of violent, thunderous explosions, the smoke billowing into the sky as the rebellion's cruel strategy unfolds. The young man stares at the carnage, his face etched with a mixture of horror and disdain at the sheer waste of life, muttering about the absolute mess the battlefield has become. Beside him, the guild instructor's voice trembles with indignation, questioning if such ruthless commanders even deserve to live, while the ethereal spirit of the elf woman looks on, disgusted by the cold-blooded use of soldiers as mere disposable pawns. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he declares a sudden change of plans, noting that despite the chaos, the sheer weight of the rebellion's numbers means the conflict will inevitably spill over to their position. As he prepares to move, the young woman who had been their captive steps forward, her voice shaky as she calls out his name, drawing the attention of the entire group. With tears welling in her eyes and a look of fierce resolve, she confesses that these are the very men who murdered her father, and she demands the chance to strike them down with her own hands. He looks at her with a somber expression, acknowledging the depth of her pain, but firmly telling her that such a task is impossible for her and that she must abandon this path of vengeance for her own safety. His gaze then shifts toward the valley, where the rebellion's commander stands tall amidst the smoke. Despite the carnage, the man radiates a sinister, overwhelming aura that signals he is a far more dangerous foe than anyone anticipated. The formidable leader's presence still loomed in their minds as the group stood atop a grassy ridge, surveying the vast expanse of the valley below. He turned his gaze toward his companion, questioning if she was truly satisfied with the current state of affairs, warning that any deviation from their established plan would invite disaster. She remained silent for a heartbeat, her expression shifting from doubt to a sudden, sharp clarity as a new strategy began to take shape in her mind. While they deliberated, the others were already in motion, straining against the weight of a heavy wooden cart laden with massive cuts of raw meat. Seeing the supplies arrive, he directed the team toward the southern slope, while the girls confirmed that they had successfully gathered their entire stock of bait for the coming gambit. The strategy was precise. They would use the terrain to their advantage, raising the earth to form a narrow, C-shaped corridor that would funnel their targets toward the south side, where the scattered meat would serve as an irresistible lure at a dead end. Deep within the surrounding wilds, the scent of the feast began to drift, drawing out the local predators and monstrous denizens from the shadows of the forest. Soon, a chaotic menagerie of beasts, from slithering lamias to prowling tigers, converged on the designated spot, their primal hunger overriding any sense of caution as they swarmed the trap. He observes the chaotic gathering with a sense of grim satisfaction, noting that the pungent scent of the bait has successfully lured in a diverse array of predators, from the fluttering golden bats to the towering forest giants and the lethal lamias. Turning his gaze toward the distant peak where the ethereal spirit keeps watch, he inquires about the enemy's movements, realizing that their success now hinges entirely on the precision of their timing. From her vantage point, she watches as the forest floor becomes a chaotic graveyard. Frequent explosions mark the locations of hidden traps, while blood-soaked soldiers scramble blindly into the deep woods. Despite the initial success of their plan, she remains grim, warning that the effectiveness of their current defenses is rapidly waning and will not hold for much longer. He absorbs her warning, his expression hardening as he prepares for the next phase of their desperate gambit. He watches as the smoke rising from the hills signals the depletion of their prepared defenses, leaving them vulnerable as the traps are triggered one by one. The pitfalls are already overflowing with the fallen, and the supply of explosives on the hill has finally run dry, leaving the remaining terrain defenseless. He considers the final destination, a field of flowers designed to induce a deep slumber, and assumes the survivors have already succumbed, but a sudden shift in the air catches his attention at that very moment. He remains hidden as the remnants of the invasion force press forward, led by the imposing commander of the rebellion. Flanked by his elite knight and archer, the leader gives the order to advance, his voice steady despite the losses they have sustained. The commander surveys the path ahead, acknowledging with a grim expression that the way is finally clear. He knows all too well that this safe passage was bought with the lives of the soldiers who fell to the traps behind them. As they step deeper into the valley, he warns his companions to maintain their guard, reminding them to be wary of any monsters or strange flora that might still be lurking in the brush. Nearby, the girl with horns focuses her immense magical energy, her hands glowing with a power that leaves her companion in awe. Despite the raw strength she is channeling, she remains patient, waiting for the signal to unleash her strike. From his vantage point in the undergrowth, the young settler tracks the enemy's progress with bated breath. He watches as the three leaders walk directly into the heart of his prepared kill zone. Seeing them reach the designated spot, he realizes the time for waiting has ended. With a determined look, he prepares to trigger the first phase of his final counteroffensive. His primary objective is to ensure there is no turning back for the invaders. He knows that to trap them effectively, he must first destroy their only means of retreat. A thunderous roar echoes through the valley as the mountainside collapses, sending a massive cascade of boulders crashing down to seal the path and trap the rebellion's leaders within the gorge. The massive wall of earth and stone slams into place, sealing the path with a thunderous roar that echoes through the gorge. He wipes the sweat from his brow, breathing heavily as the immense exertion of the spell takes its toll. Though his magic reserves are nearly depleted, he takes a moment to acknowledge that the first phase of the plan is finally complete. Seeing the barrier in place, he calls out to his companion, signaling that it is time for her to act. Nearby, the rebel commander realizes too late that they have been lured into a deadly trap. She narrows her eyes, her gaze hardening with a singular, intense focus as she prepares to release the power she has been gathering. With a piercing cry, she thrusts her hands forward, unleashing a violent torrent of magical energy that sweeps across the battlefield like a physical force. As the magic takes hold, the menagerie of beasts, the tiger, the lamia, and the other creatures of the forest, stand poised and ready, their predatory instincts sharpened for the coming clash. The monsters surge forward in a chaotic wave, descending upon the trapped soldiers. The rebel leader stands his ground, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the unnatural army now bearing down on him. He breaks into a sprint through the dense foliage, knowing that the real battle has only just begun and that there is no turning back from the chaos he has unleashed. He stands atop the massive stone barrier, looking down at the chaos below. Observing the swarming monsters, he notes with grim satisfaction that they are gathering exactly where they need to be. From the edge of the ridge, the young woman calls out his name, her voice carrying a note of urgency across the divide. He grunts with the effort, his muscles tensing as he pours his remaining strength into the magical feat. Every fiber of his being is focused on maintaining the delicate balance of the spell. The strategy is clear. By trapping the magical beast within the gorge, they can then use magic to selectively reopen parts of the passage, funneling the monsters directly toward their enemies. Deep within the woods, the rebel commander suddenly freezes, his sharp eyes narrowing as he senses a shift in the air. His companions remain on high alert, sensing that the tide of battle is about to turn in an unexpected direction. A wall of monstrous flesh and bone suddenly rises before the group. A colossal turtle, a snarling bear, and prehistoric predators loom over the rebellion leaders, their sheer numbers turning the landscape into a nightmare of claws and teeth. They stare in disbelief at the overwhelming force. The archer's voice trembles as she demands to know what is happening, the sudden appearance of the horde shattering their composure. Surrounding the fur-clad commander, even more beasts emerge from the shadows. Ape-like creatures and a pack of snarling wolves close in, their predatory eyes fixed on the lone warrior who stands defiant against the encroaching tide. Watching from a distance, the young settler comes to a grim realization. He understands now that the true danger of the demon land isn't a hidden pit or a magical ward, but the very beasts that inhabit it, acting as a living, breathing trap for any who dare to intrude. Realizing the hopelessness of their position, the warriors begin a desperate retreat. The armored knight urges them to fall back toward the river, acknowledging that the sheer volume of monsters has made a direct confrontation impossible. He narrows his eyes, scanning the chaos for a way out. The commander's mind races, searching for a tactical advantage even as the situation spirals further out of control. The retreat quickly turns into a slaughter as a massive beast devours a soldier in a single, horrific bite. To make matters worse, a sheer rock wall has suddenly appeared, cutting off their intended escape route and leaving them cornered. Desperate, the archer pleads with her leader to save himself while there is still time. She continues to fight, her bow singing as she fends off a swarm of smaller, insect-like creatures and scavenging beasts. Despite her skill, the sheer number of attackers is overwhelming, and her cries of distress echo through the blood-soaked clearing. She and the rest of the rebellion are pushed to the brink, but the young man's thoughts are consumed by the futility of their situation. He stares down in defeat, realizing that their only choices are to face the overwhelming horde of monsters or find a desperate alternative. The warrior leading the rebellion is not so easily discouraged. However, as he identifies a narrow opening in the rock face, he notes that they deliberately left this small hole open, a passage so tight it can only accommodate one person at a time, forcing any escapees into a bottleneck. He stands guard before the dark crevice, his massive sword drawn and ready. The silence of the cavern is heavy as he waits for whatever might emerge from the shadows of the narrow tunnel. He suddenly freezes, his eyes widening in surprise as he senses an unexpected presence approaching from the gloom. The youth stumbles into view, breathing heavily from exhaustion. The commander stares at him, demanding to know his identity while marveling at the boy's tenacity for surviving this long in such a treacherous place. He stands his ground despite the warrior's intimidating presence, declaring the intrusion illegal and demanding an immediate departure. The commander's gaze intensifies as he questions, if this unassuming young man is truly the master of these cursed lands. He is taken aback when the commander's expression hardens with lethal intent, reasoning that the conflict will end once the youth is dead. The young man recoils, shocked by the sudden, bloodthirsty shift in the warrior's demeanor. He narrowly evades a powerful strike as the warrior lunges forward, desperately pleading for the man to stop and actually listen for once instead of resorting to violence. He narrowly avoids a devastating downward strike from the massive warrior, the ground shattering where he stood just moments before. The youth is stunned by the sheer force behind the blow, realizing his opponent has reinforced his arm with earth magic to achieve such incredible power. He struggles to hold his ground as their blades lock. To survive the onslaught, he channels wind magic, subtly altering the trajectory of the heavy blade to deflect its lethal tip away from his vitals. His boots skid across the dirt, kicking up dust as he fights to maintain his footing against the relentless pressure. Seizing a momentary opening, he vaults high into the air, soaring over the commander's reach before landing in a defensive crouch several paces away. Both men pause to catch their breath, the air thick with tension. While the young man acknowledges the commander's formidable strength, he wonders how long the warrior's magical reserves can sustain such an intensity. Conversely, the commander is unsettled by the youth's unorthodox and unfamiliar combat techniques. Narrowing his eyes, the commander begins to notice a troubling pattern. Despite the youth's obvious skill, he hasn't made a single attempt to strike back, focusing entirely on evasion and defense. He watches as the youth remains hunched over, gasping for air, his confusion deepening as he silently questions why his opponent refuses to fight with lethal intent. He throws back his head and laughs, a booming sound that echoes across the clearing as he finally understands the strategy at play. Grasping a handful of the loose earth, he realizes the true nature of the terrain they are fighting on. Continuing his observation, he points out that during their clash, the youth has been intentionally maneuvering him toward hidden pitfalls. As the young man leaps nimbly over a concealed hole, the commander scans the ground, noting that once he knows what to look for, the traps are visible everywhere. He remains composed, his expression steady as he explains his philosophy. When one possesses knowledge of where the dangers lie, the fear of the unknown vanishes. He is forced to react as the warrior lunges forward with a murderous roar, his massive blade cutting through the air in a desperate attempt to end the confrontation. As the warrior's blade descends, a new force enters the fray as a young woman swings a colossal hammer with surprising grace and power, shifting the momentum of the battle. She looks on with determination while the youth clarifies that the strategy involves more than just simple traps. It isn't merely about the enemy falling into holes. There is a deeper purpose to the excavations. While they stand their ground, the commander's eyes widen in shock as the truth is literally unearthed before him. These aren't just pitfalls designed to trip an army. They are foxholes, and from one of them, the veteran land agent emerges, pipe in hand, ready to strike from the shadows. As he reels from the surprise, she offers a small, confident smile, her eyes bright with the thrill of the successful ambush. He watched as the young settler declared the conflict finished, the weight of the moment settling over the battlefield. The rebellion's leader stood in stunned silence, his spirit broken by the unexpected turn of events. Because of this decisive victory, a cheer erupted from the surrounding woods, the sunlight breaking through the canopy as if to bless the sudden peace. Moments later, the masked observer who had overseen the enemy forces sat before the youth, questioning if there was any desire left in him to continue the bloodshed. The boy remained calm, his resolve unshaken by the presence of the high-ranking official. In response to the boy's steadfast gaze, the commander stammered, his previous confidence replaced by a visible tremor of unease as he realized the battle was truly lost. As the dust settled, the war between the Demon Land and East Kenya reached its conclusion. The invading forces fled in a frantic retreat, leaving behind their wounded and a solemn vow never to interfere with the realm again. A few days after the chaos had subsided, the group traveled to the local military training facility to deliver their formal report on the skirmish and the subsequent peace treaty. Upon their arrival, the captain greeted them with genuine warmth, offering sincere words of praise and gratitude for their bravery in defending the territory against the rebellion. Finally, the long-awaited official document arrived, bearing the seal that formally recognized the ownership of the Demon Land, securing their future and their hard-won home at last. The dense forest stood silent, a testament to the peace that had finally settled over the land after the long conflict. Within this newfound tranquility, the young settler discussed his upcoming journey with the instructor, explaining that he had to travel all the way to the capital for a formal ceremony. She seemed surprised by the necessity of the trip, but he clarified that the military was already arranging a carriage for his departure. He downplayed the grandeur of the event, noting that despite the long travel, it was merely a symbolic gesture where the king would place a sword on his shoulder to officially appoint him as a noble. Turning to the rest of his companions, He estimated the round trip would take roughly 10 days and entrusted the care of their home to them while he was away. True to his word, the carriage set off at the break of dawn the following morning, carrying him toward the heart of the kingdom. In his absence, a heavy silence fell over the four women left behind, each lost in their own swirling thoughts as they watched the dust settle on the road. Days began to blend into one another as time flowed steadily and without incident in the settlement. Meanwhile, the land agent remained at his post, overseeing the quiet daily life of the region from his modest stall. He looked up as the young traveler approached, requesting a simple meal of sausage and bread for the road ahead. Handing over the food, the agent remarked on the heavy load the youth carried, only to be told the destination was the Demon Land, far to the east. The older man burst into laughter, questioning if the boy had a death wish before mentioning a rumor about a noble born in those cursed lands. He asked if the youth intended to serve such a person, to which the traveler replied he had no such desire. Finishing his meal with a satisfied sigh, he casually dropped a bombshell, revealing that he himself was the very noble the agent had spoken of. While the agent stood frozen in shock, the youth explained that he had abandoned his carriage and guards because running was simply more efficient, then vanished into a blur of speed, leaving the man sputtering about the impropriety of a noble traveling without an escort. As he sprinted across the open plains, he reflected on the poor image the demon realm still held in the eyes of the world, realizing that to govern his new territory effectively, he would need to find unique specialty products to bolster its reputation. A sudden thought gave him pause. At the moment, his fledgling administration consisted of nothing more than a small group of staff. Gazing up at the vast, cloud-streaked sky, he felt the weight of the tasks ahead, from uncovering the truth behind the noble in the sky and the ancient secrets of Estonia to solving the mystery surrounding PJ. The vast expanse of the Demon Land stretches out, a rugged and untamed territory that finally comes into sight. He stands at the edge of a ridge, his heavy pack weighing on his shoulders as he gazes down at the destination he has worked so hard to reach. Looking out over the horizon, he reflects on the hardships they have endured, acknowledging that their survival thus far has been no small feat. He finds a quiet resolve as the wind rustles through the trees of the valley below, certain that they will continue to persevere through whatever challenges lie ahead. Upon reaching the settlement, he approaches his companions and immediately inquires if any trouble had arisen during his absence. He is greeted by them with a chorus of warm welcomes, their faces lighting up with relief and excitement as they notice the supplies he has brought back. Their joyful faces are met with a small, satisfied smile that touches his lips as he takes in the sight of his friends, safe and sound. He looks at them with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to lead his people into a new era for their land. He announces his return with a joyful shout, and the group of women greets him with bright smiles and a welcoming wave. The atmosphere is light and full of relief as they gather under the vast, cloud-streaked sky of the Demon Land, happy to see him safe.